Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. On returning late to the leaky cauldron, Harry retired directly to his room. There he immediately drafted the first of 2 letters to go to Mesdames Longbottom and Bones about his experience with the Greengrasses. He kept the information light and was reticent in what he included that he felt were private between he and the Greengrasses. He sent the first letter off to Madame Longbottom that night with Hedwig before he settled down to meditate, to sort his new memories, creating a new section dedicated to Daphne in the process, before going to sleep. Early the next morning, he wrote a similar letter to Madame Bones about the meeting, and as Hedwig had not yet returned, posted it off using one of the post office owls in Diagon Alley. He returned to his room and packed everything up ready for his short-term move to Greengrass estate. With his glamours in place, he went downstairs to enjoy a quick breakfast, his last for the time being at the leaky cauldron, and headed back into the alley proper on his way to Gringotts. Quickly finding a teller, he asked to be taken down to his heirlooms and trust fund vaults. From the trust fund vault, he refilled his coin pouch before moving on to the heirloom vault. From within, he went to the section where the jewelry was stored. From memory, he knew just what he was looking for, and found them as he remembered them. The family rings. He picked out a feminine-looking ring with a brilliant cut sapphire mounted in a white gold band, plus a single gold band with a smaller but similar stone mounted almost flush within it for himself. He felt the stone and white gold were fairly well matched to the eyes and hair color of his betrothed. Returning to the surface, he visited Bloodfang to let him know he was enacting the betrothal contract between himself and Daphne Greengrass, and to ask for assistance in getting the current charms on the rings checked and/or updated. Bloodfang recommended a jeweler not far down the alley above the second-hand robe shop, and mentioned it was the Potter family preferred jeweler. In the jeweler's, he showed the 2 rings and said, "I'd like to know what charms or wards or whatever are on these rings. Then, based on that information, what I can have placed on them if they're not already there." Giving a nod, the proprietor said, "Give me about an hour, young sir, and I'll have that information for you, all right?" "That suits me fine, thank you," replied Harry. "I'll see you then." Harry then left the jeweler and walked back up the alley to Eilip's Owl Emporium. Inside, he approached the counter and waited until he was spotted. One of the reasons he liked to come into the alley early in the morning was because there was less traffic and other shoppers at that time. "Good morning and welcome back, sir. How can I help you today?" asked the shopkeeper, recognizing Harry as an often repeat customer. "Good morning," replied Harry. "I have of late become concerned my owl mail is being intercepted. I'm led to believe my own owl can be warded or charmed to ensure mail carried by her cannot be so intercepted. Is that true?" Frowning, the shopkeeper said, "It's unheard of in this day and age for owl mail to be intercepted because the penalties for such are quite severe. Furthermore, it disgusts me that someone would do such a thing, invade someone's privacy like that. However, if your mail is being intercepted or you're just worried it might be, I do have an answer to your dilemma," he replied. "Is your owl used by your head of house?" "Yes, sir," replied Harry. After a quick look around to ensure there was no one who could listen in, he flashed his head of house ring to the shopkeeper. "The owl belongs to the head of house Potter," he quietly said. Looking a little surprised at the ring on Harry's finger, the shopkeeper said, "Well, it's good to finally know your identity, Mr. Potter, and I can understand why you're concerned about your mail being intercepted, and thank you for your trust. You'll have my discretion in this matter." The old man walked into the back of the store for a few moments before returning with a small wooden box. Placing it on the counter between them, he opened it to show what was inside. Reaching in, he withdrew a small harness with tiny buckles, leather straps, and a blank shield on it. "This is the deluxe model," he said. "It's a harness that affixes to the chest of your owl and identifies it as the personal owl for official correspondence of a head of one of the noble and ancient houses. You strap it on to your owl and then touch the crest of your ring to the shield. The shield is charmed to automatically display the crest of the house to which it belongs, in your case the noble and most ancient house of Potter, and also cause the straps to auto-size to the bird. I assure you it doesn't harm the bird in any way, and we've been using these for years. The harness is charmed to repel water, dust, and damage. It also protects the bird from male interception, up to and including ministry-sanctioned interceptions, protects the bird from other raptors, provides some protection from spell damage, and provides the bird with auto-healing of light injuries. An intent-based notice-me-not charm from those who would do her harm, an energy boost similar to a pepper-up potion for those extra long flights, and aids in providing a featherlight charm to any packages over 1/4 pound in dead weight up to 20 pounds. Are there any other charms that can be added you think might be useful? Asked Harry. Shaking his head, the shopkeeper replied, No, after many years of trial and error, we've found this particular combination to be the best available. The only thing more you can do is make the owl your personal familiar. That grants her or him a higher level of intelligence, and will mean she'll be able to better protect your male herself. Nodding, Harry asked, And how do I do that? The shopkeeper reached under his counter and drew forth a small fact sheet on the subject. He placed it on the counter next to the box. You'll be surprised how many ask just that, he replied with a wry smile. Harry grinned back and said, All right then, I'll take it. Nodding, the shopkeeper said, That'll be 57 galleons for the harness. The pamphlet is free. The harness has a lifetime guarantee to the life of the owl if you need to replace either or both. Come back and see me. Harry paid the man after, also picking up 6 months' worth of owl treats as stock to take to Hogwarts with him. Next, he headed for the Diagon Alley offices of the Daily Prophet and organized a year's subscription in advance to the newspaper. Recognizing that near enough to an hour had passed, he returned to the jeweler's. Bringing the rings back onto the main floor of the shop, the jeweler had them side by side on a black velvet cushion. These are beautiful rings, said the shopkeeper. I hope you don't mind, but I've also polished both back to looking like new. No, that's fine, replied Harry, and thank you. What can you tell me about them? The lady's ring is charmed to auto size, has an anti-theft charm, has an anti-peril feature, which monitors the wearer's heartbeat and adrenaline levels so that if both suddenly shoot up, it sends a vibration to a matching ring. It has the ability to be linked to that other ring to allow the wearer of its partner to track them down by pressing on the stone and vice versa, and has a built-in potion, poison and mind-altering charm detector, which causes the ring to vibrate and stone to glow slightly when it comes into near contact with such. The ring will also provide a minimal protection from the imperious confounding obliviation and similar curses, but it's not foolproof against those. The other ring is the matching ring and has the same charms. The only thing missing is a new charm which detects if the wearer is hit with a harmful curse or hex and alerts the other wearer the same way as the anti-peril feature, said the shopkeeper. However, it only detects those curses and hexes that are common knowledge. Some hexes and curses, such as those that are part of family magics, it might not detect. Are there any other protections you think could be installed? Asked Harry. I want my betrothed as safe as she possibly could be. Shaking his head, the shopkeeper said, No, but I can update the anti-potion and poison detector and harmful curses and hexes indicator with a more modern list. I suspect they'll both be missing quite a few. Plus, you may want to be on my mailing list. I maintain to advise my clients when either indicator charms are updated. All right then, said Harry, coming to a decision. Update what needs to be updated on both rings and add me and my betrothed to your mailing list. The shopkeeper drew forth a ledger from under his counter and asked, And what names do I include on the mailing list, young sir? I'm trusting in your discretion in this, sir, said Harry before flashing his head of house ring. It's Harry Potter and Daphne Greengrass. Taking a moment to glance at Harry's forehead, the shopkeeper said, Never fear in my discretion, Mr. Potter. I've never broken faith with a customer yet, in over 20 years of business. Then he said with a small smile, And might I say congratulations on your betrothal, Mr. Potter. I dare say there will be many a young witch, and possibly some young wizards, who will be most distraught when it is learned you are betrothed and off the market, so to speak. Harry harumphed a little and said, At least that's something I won't have to worry about facing any more, and thank you. Nodding a little, though otherwise distracted, the shopkeeper said, Give me 2 hours. with these rings and they'll be ready for you to collect, Mr. Potter." Before he picked up the velvet cushion and turned to walk back out the back with them. "Thank you," called Harry to the man's retreating back before he left the store once more. Heading back to the leaky cauldron, Harry went straight back to his room and hoped Hedwig had returned. She had, and with a short reply from Madame Longbottom, she advised caution with dealing with the green grasses and said she'd meet him on the platform at King's Cross to make sure he was still okay. While Hedwig was resting on her perch with her little tray of owl treats and water, Harry brought the harness out of his pocket and showed it to her. "Feel like being gussied up a bit, Hed? This will identify you as the personal owl of the head of House Potter, my owl." He grinned at her. Hedwig looked at the harness with interest before giving a soft hoot and huff. Harry figured she approved, so moved forward with it to fit it to her. Working carefully so as not to damage her feathers, Harry took his time in fitting the harness and making sure all the buckles were done up securely. Then he made a fist of his right hand and, holding the shield with his left hand, pressed the face of head of house ring to the face of the shield. The shield gave a little flash of light before the entire harness began to glow. He pulled the ring away from the shield and let go with his left hand as the entire contraption shifted until it shrank down to fit. When it finished, auto-sizing the shield gave a final flash with an embossed copy of the Potter crest appearing in the middle of it. Stepping back, Harry said to her, "Wow, girl, you look great. It really suits you." In response, Hedwig stood up a little straighter and gave a happy little hoot. Harry even moved her to his shoulder and then moved to stand in front of the room's only mirror so she could see it for herself. When she saw the image, she gave a couple of little huffs and nibbled on the top of Harry's ear in pleasure. Harry chuckled and moved her back to her roost. "You'll be fighting the boy owls off now, Hed. You look gorgeous." Next, he pulled the pamphlet that described how to make Hedwig his familiar out of his pocket and read through it. This is pretty straightforward and easy," he said to her. "So, girl, how about it? Do you want to fully bond with me as my familiar?" He received another happy hoot and huff in response. With a grin, Harry drew his wand out of his left sleeve, held the parchment up so he could read it, and stood in front of the owl's perch. Pushing a little with his magic, he made the required wand gestures and spoke the required incantations. When he was finished, there was a light glow for a few moments around and between the two of them. Stepping back and away a little, Harry closed his eyes and focused on feeling his connection to Hedwig. It took a few minutes, but he realized he could sense it quite easily. Plus, he also felt he could feel the, though primitive, emotions coming from his avian friend. She was very happy. Turning back to face her again, he said, "Now, according to this pamphlet, you should have a boost in your intelligence, had transferred to your mind some of my skills, be able to sense my thoughts and emotions similar to how I'm able to do the same with you, and it's extended your life expectancies somewhat. I think this will prove to be a very good thing for us both." He grinned at her. "Now, I'm pretty much all packed here, girl," he said. "I'll just give you a message to give to Isabel, to let her know I've sent you ahead of me and that I'm still on schedule to arrive at Greengrass Estate at 1:0 p.m., and you can be on your way." He then sat down at the little table in the room and quickly wrote the message before using the little strap on the harness to attach it to the owl's leg. He sent her on her way before packing the last items up and stowing the portable owl perch in the lid of his trunk. He shrunk the trunk down and pocketed it in his robes before leaving the room for the last time and heading back to the jeweler's. As soon as he walked in the door, the jeweler shopkeeper spotted him, smiled, and reached under the counter where he was standing and brought out a small ring box of deep blue-colored velvet. Opening the box, he showed Harry the 2 rings sitting within with the stones facing up. "All done, Mr. Potter," he said. Harry grinned at the box and said, "Thank you very, very much. How much do I owe you?" "Just 15 galleons, Mr. Potter," he replied, "and might I say it was a pleasure to do this for you." Harry quickly handed the man the coins and peered intently at the 2 rings nestled within the box. "You do very nice work, sir," he said. "I dare say that when I upgrade these in a few years to husband and wife rings, I'll be back." Nodding graciously, the shopkeeper said, "And I look forward to that happy day." "Again, thank you," said Harry as he left the store. A ring box was now safely stored within one of the pockets of his robes. Back at the Leaky Cauldron, Harry finalized his bill for his stay and ordered a light lunch. He picked up a discarded copy of that morning's Daily Prophet and whiled away the time until he headed back to the Greengrass estate, perusing the paper. While sitting there, an owl arrived and dropped off a response letter from Madam Bones. As with Madam Longbottom, she advised caution and said she'd try and meet him on the platform at King's Cross before departure of the Hogwarts Express, just to ensure herself he was still fine. It gave Harry a bit of a warm feeling to know that there were now people who were interested and caring enough to care about his welfare. It felt odd but nice at the same time. At precisely 1:00 p.m, Harry stepped through the flue into Greengrass Manor and promptly fell on his butt again. Climbing to his feet and grumbling to himself, Harry heard the soft tinkle of feminine laughter coming from a few feet away. Glancing up, he saw Isabel waiting for him, chuckling to herself. He gave a wry grin in response. "My apologies, Harry," she chuckled, "but that, a dignified entry does not make." "I think it's now official," grumbled Harry, dusting himself off. "The flue system hates me." Chuckling again, Isabel stepped forward and waved her wand over Harry. Instantly, the soot was vanished away. "Actually, there's a trick to it," she said. "I'll be happy to show you when we travel through it together to the old Midland Grand Hotel, if not before." "Midland Grand Hotel?" asked Harry. "Why there?" "The Midland is an old Muggle hotel, pretty much built almost right on top of King's Cross Station. We use a hidden floor and hidden rear entrance in the old hotel as the flubble point to get onto the platform. Then it's only a short walk through the Muggle side of the station to the barrier to platform 9. "Oh," said Harry. "I did not know that." As they were talking, Isabel was leading Harry upstairs to the second floor. She then turned to the right and entered the upstairs wing, which Harry thought would place him somewhere over the formal lounge. Stopping at one of the doors to her right, and therefore at the rear of the manor, she opened it wide and ushered Harry inside. "This will be your rooms for the next few days, Harry," she said. Stepping in through the door, Harry saw a large 4-poster bed with side tables dominating the room. Off to one side, he saw a small desk with a lamp and chair ready for use, and 2 other doors. Isabel walked over to the one closest to the rear wall of the manor and opened it. Inside, Harry saw a neat and tidy bathroom with its own separate bath and shower, toilet and hand basin with a mirror above it. The other door, on the same wall as the door to the bathroom, was a small walk-in robe. With all the clothing he had, Harry didn't believe his entire wardrobe would fill even a tiny fraction of the space available. "Now set yourself up in here and come downstairs when you're done," Isabel instructed. "The girls and I are currently in the kitchen at the informal table in there." "Thank you," said Harry as the older woman left. He reached into his pocket and unshrunk his trunk, placing it at the foot of his bed. Opening it, he pulled out Hedwig's portable perch and set it up near the window, and refilled the owl treat and water bowls for her. To burn off a few minutes, he then unpacked his toiletries and transferred them to the bathroom. All done, he walked out of the room and took the stairs back down to the ground floor and went off in search of the kitchen. He figured it'd be near the dining room somewhere and probably at the rear of the house. After leaving his room upstairs, Harry headed straight back downstairs and headed for the formal dining room. From there, he heard the sounds of voices coming through another door, so moved to that one and pushed the door open. He was greeted by a second, smaller dining room with the opposite wall wide open and showing a large kitchen. Sitting at the table were Isabel, Daphne, and Astoria. As soon as Harry stuck his head through the door, Astoria spotted him. With a cry of "Harry," she launched herself off the chair, covered the intervening few feet at a run and tackle-hugged him. "Welcome back," she exclaimed. With a grin, Harry hugged her back and said, "Thank you, Astoria. It's good to be back." She then let him go, grabbed him by his hand, and dragged him over to the table. Pulling a chair out for him next to her own, she commanded, "Sit." With a chuckle, Harry sat. He was sitting opposite Daphne, who looked back with a wary half-stare. Isabel spoke up and said, "We were just discussing plans for the next few days, Harry, and need your input." All right," replied Harry. "Have you got all your supplies for Hogwarts yet?" she asked. "Yes, Isabel, I think I'm right to go," he replied. "Leastwise, there was nothing on the list I received that I've not yet purchased and packed ready to go." What about the essentials that aren't listed? Toiletries, non-school uniform clothing for the weekends, extra quills, inks and parchment, owl treats for your owl, stuff like that? Yeah, I think so, said Harry. I can't think of anything else I might need. Nodding, she said, well, Daphne feels she might need a few extra supplies, so we were thinking of ducking over to Diagon Alley later this afternoon to allow the purchase of those items. You're welcome to come along if you like. But you don't have to if you don't want to. No, I've got nothing better to do, he said. Maybe I'll just come along and help carry bags or something. Smiling, she said, there's no need for someone to carry bags in the wizarding world, Harry. That's what shrinking charms and pockets are for. However, we plan to head into the Muggle world tomorrow afternoon, and as we cannot shrink bags there, there's always a need for bag carriers until we can duck into a lady's somewhere to shrink them. Then I can always just provide company, said Harry with a bit of a shrug. That is, if no one minds. Of course not, replied Astoria. Besides, we might see some of my friends there. They'll be ever so jealous if they see me with you. Harry smiled at the chipper young girl before turning to Daphne. And what about you, Daphne? Do you mind me joining you on your trip to Diagon Alley? With a half-hearted huff, the girl replied, no, before she straightened up a bit and said, but be warned, I may be meeting my closest friend, Tracy Davis, there. She'll be in our year at Hogwarts, and you might not choose to be around us when we girl talk. That's okay, Harry replied with a shrug. I can make myself scarce then, if you need me to. You need your friends and your secrets, and I can respect that. That received Harry another long look from the girl and a knowing smile from his future mother-in-law. With another huff, Daphne half growled at him, You cannot be that perfect. No one can. You're putting on an act. I can feel it. With a sigh, Harry said, My upbringing was not the stuff of those silly books supposedly about my childhood. You know the ones, Harry Potter and the Naughty Nundu, for example. When the girl nodded back, though reluctantly, he continued in a somewhat sad voice. When I was growing up with the Dursleys, I was told all sorts of lies about who I was. I was denied having any friends of my own. I was treated like a slave while my fat whale of a cousin was treated like a prince in front of me. One of the things I promised myself during that time was never to even think about trying to control anyone else if I was ever able to escape that life through word, deed, or intent. I just will not do it. When I finally entered the wizarding world, or re-entered, one of the first things I discovered is that I'm contractually betrothed to a girl I'd never met and had no idea even existed until the same moment. It took me quite some time to contain my anger and think of the situation in a logical manner. Of course, one of the first revelations of that introspective thought process was that the girl, though she may have known of me and the contract for some time, was just as trapped by it as I was, and it would be petty and unjust of me to hold her accountable for it. Furthermore, because the contract would trap her in one part of her life to be bound to me as my wife and mate, it behoved me to ensure that all other aspects of her life were given as much freedom as possible. This I have vowed to do, and that's why you won't hear me trying to place any controls on your life. I will do my best not to gainsay you. I will do my best to not only allow you to live your life, but assist you in living it as best I can. I'm willing, and I dare say want to, share my life with you. I hope you're willing to do the same with me. After he'd finished his clearly emotional little speech, the table sat in silence for a few moments. Damn Potter, said Daphne, in a small voice. Why do you have to be so bloody noble? Why do you have to be so bloody perfect? Mind your language, Daphne, said her mother, though there was no heat in the words. It was almost as if she was just going through the motions of saying them. I don't know about being noble, replied Harry with a shrug. I just know how I want others to behave concerning me, and try and behave like that towards others. Besides, I know I'm not perfect. Hesitating a bit, he said, when I was little, I received a major whack to the side of my head. I also used to have a lot of trouble staying focused on whatever it was I was doing at the time. Ever since the whack, I've had difficulty maintaining control over my anger. I told a teacher about my trouble with both focusing and anger management, and he recommended I learn how to meditate. He said that meditation for some people allowed them to better control their emotions, aided them in focusing their thoughts, and could also improve their memory retention. So I went to the school library and later the public library and read through books on the subject. That led me into reading other books on controlling your own mind, all Muggle techniques. And through those books I learned I have what is called an eidetic memory. Part of the problem I had was that I could remember everything, and that those memories were completely jumbled up and were forcibly intruding or leaking onto my consciousness. It took some time, but I was able to slowly learn how to meditate. After reaching that state, I then attempted to build what Plato referred to as a mind palace. That's something orators of the day would use to organize their thoughts before a major speech. However, instead of being able to build a mind palace such as Plato described, I found myself able to build a palace within my mind that was vividly detailed. I was then able to sort through my memories, which had appeared in my mind as books, and sort them into library shelves within that palace. It took me many months to reach that stage. I also found that the act of doing that helped me in being able to stop the memory intrusions, allowed me to discover the true power of having an eidetic memory, and aided me in controlling my temper. Since the day I first started researching meditation, I've always been on the lookout for books on controlling your own mind. So, when I first entered the wizarding world almost 6 weeks ago, and after going to the bank and finding out I had plenty of money available to me, I stopped in at Flourish and Blots to see if the magical world had similar books. Of course they do, and I started with a book called Introduction to Mind Magics. From that, I read about occlumency. That led me to a self-study book on occlumency and legilimency. From that, I learned that I was so successful at meditation and building my mind palace because I was a wizard, and that such things come easier to those such as us. I also learned I could isolate that part in my mind where my anger bubbles away. I see it now as a seething giant cauldron, by the way, and I was able to wall it off, separating it from the core me, and put some basic controls on it. Now I can almost consciously monitor the condition of the cauldron and have a way to calm the contents of it back down, but it's an ongoing process, and I have to constantly set aside time to ensure that the cauldron doesn't overflow, that my anger does not get the better of me. So I'm sorry to say I'm going to come across as being quite emotionless when I should be showing signs of strong emotion. Some of the kids where I went to school in the Muggle world thought I was turning into a robot, an android, something other than human. They picked on me somewhat for it. However, I'm not always successful. There has been the rare time where my emotions have nearly gotten the better of me. At those times, I get a splitting headache and feel as if I'm being suffocated. But I've never become violent with anyone during those times. I just tend to rant and rave for a while until I can get my anger back into check and calm that cauldron down again. Secondly, people who lie to me really upset me. When I was growing up, my aunt and uncle kept telling me I was a worthless freak and that I should thank my lucky stars. They were kind enough to give me a place to live, that my drunken bum of a father got he and my whore of a mother killed in a car crash. The same car crash, they said. He lifted his fringe to indicate the scar on his forehead, gave me this scar. During that time, and before I was able to organize my memories, I used to get these flashbacks of a time when I was a baby, a time when I knew I was loved by adults, a man who had similar hair to my own who wore aviator-style glasses, a woman I instinctively knew to be my mother who had long red hair and bright green eyes, plus others. Before I was able to sort these memories, because of what my relatives told me, I thought they were just daydreams of what I wished my life was like. That they were, in effect, lies I was telling myself. However, after I was able to sort my memories, I learned it was my relatives that had lied to me, and not the other way around. It took me a long time to reach that conclusion, because I just did not want to believe it to be true. I didn't want to believe that people, my own relatives no less, could be so cruel. My letter from Hogwarts, I received on 26 July, was the final conclusive proof. It was also the day I decided to vacate that house and find the wizarding world. My memories led me to Charing Cross Road and the Leaky Cauldron. It was the best decision I ever made. When he'd finished, Harry sighed in some measure of self-pity. So, you see, I'm far from perfect, he said. I just do my best with what I have and hope it's enough. Harry didn't even notice that while he was talking, reminiscing, a cup of tea appeared on the table in front of him, nor that he'd been playing with it. When he'd concluded, he realized he'd divulged more than he had planned to, but that in doing so he felt a sense of release. Looking up, he saw Daphne looking back with an expression of pity and sorrow. She reached out with her right hand and grasped his left in a sign of solidarity. Astoria hopped off her own chair, slid it closer to his, and climbed back on it before wrapping her arms around him from the side. She just silently hugged him. Taking a deep breath, Isabel said, "Well, I think we can honestly say we weren't expecting to hear that." Turning to look more fully at Harry, she said, "Thank you for sharing that with us, Harry. Clearly it was difficult for you to do so, but just as clearly you needed to share it with someone. I'm glad you felt comfortable enough to share it with us." "I'm sorry, Harry," said Daphne softly. "I've been behaving like such a beast to you, and you've already had to endure so much." Giving a bit of a sheepish shrug in response, Harry replied, "Like I said, I understand why you feel the way you do. I don't blame you for it." "No, but I do," she said more firmly. "I now better understand this betrothal contract wasn't any more your fault as it was mine. I promise not to be angry with you over it from now on." "Thank you," Harry said softly. "And now I think it's time we all got some fresh air by making our way to Diagon Alley," said Isabel in a tone trying to lighten the mood. "I don't know about you, but shopping always makes me feel better." And the four of them rose from the table and organized themselves for a trip to the alley. Before stepping into the fireplace at Greengrass Estate, Isabel told Harry what she felt was the secret to traveling by flow and landing without falling over at the other end. "You need to wait for the spinning to stop once you arrive in the fireplace at the other end," she instructed. "Wait about a full second and then step out with your right foot slightly off to the right to counteract the remaining effect of the spin, and then step out with the left foot right in front." Harry nodded and said, "All right then, I'll give it a go." Following as instructed, he managed to only stagger slightly when he exited the flue in the leaky cauldron, and immediately stepped away to allow Isabel to step through. "How'd you do?" asked Isabel after she gracefully stepped through. "Well, I didn't fall on my butt this time," grinned Harry. "I only staggered a little bit. I think I now know how to fix that." She gave a little smile and nod while drawing her wand and vanishing the soot off the clothes of all four of them. "Excellent. We'll have you landing with a measure of grace by the time you leave on Sunday morning." She then led their small party out into the alley proper. "Where to first, Daphne?" she asked the girl. "I said I'd check Fortescue's first to see if Tracy beat us here. If not, I told her to meet us at Flourish and Blots." "Then lead the way, dear," her mother said with a gesture. Following behind with Isabel, Harry was feeling at peace. The talk earlier really did make him feel better about things, and he was happy just to spend time with the Greengrass ladies. By the time he and Isabel reached Fortescue's, Daphne was hugging another girl with similar length but brown hair. Astoria was practically hopping from foot to foot in excitement, looking like she wanted to just run up and down the alley in delight. When the two girls parted, Daphne glanced at Tracy before saying in a quiet voice to the other girl, "Remember how I told you I found out I was betrothed to Harry Potter?" "Yes," replied Tracy with a giggle. "Is he as horrid as you thought he'd be?" With a blush of embarrassment, Daphne indicated Harry and said, "Trace, this is Harry Potter. And no, he's really not." Tracy stared him up and down for a bit before she said, "Well, you do look a little like all the books say you do. Different glasses, though. And you're a bit scrawnier than I'd expect." "Tracy," gasped Daphne. Blushing a little and also a little annoyed, Harry replied, "Well, those books are 99% lies, and I know for a fact they don't know the real me." Tracy mused, standing a little straighter. "Well, you better be good to my friend or you'll have me to answer to." "I assure you, Lady Tracy, I will both protect her and cherish her. You have my word," he replied. Giving Harry another once-over, the brunette turned back to her friend and said, "He'll do." "Tracy," whined Daphne, "you're embarrassing me." "All right, girls," said Isabel, stepping forward. "We came here to do some shopping, so let's get to it, shall we?" What followed was Daphne and Tracy, leading them from store to store, while they walked whispering rapid-fire to each other and glancing back at Harry. In response, Harry would occasionally make faces back or give an air of indifference to their antics. Isabel, while also keeping an eye on all four children, seemed to be quite amused at the byplay between the three 11-year-olds. Harry had the impression she was quite happy with what was going on. While in Flourish and Blots, Daphne suggested to Harry he purchase a book on potion reaction tables that would come in handy for that class but wasn't included on the book list. And when he indicated which books he had on that subject, she indicated a book on the history of the noble houses to augment the ones he already had. He bought both and thanked her for the suggestions. In Madame Malkin's, the girls pushed him into the male side of the store while they blushed and giggled and moved across into the female side. Harry didn't want to know what they were shopping for, but had his suspicions. While waiting, he asked about mail ordering services the store provided and was placed on their list of names of people who wanted to receive information of upcoming fashions. After a slight hesitation, he asked to put Daphne's name on the same list for female fashions. Not long afterwards, after they'd left the store, Harry suggested to Daphne she invite Tracy to join them back at the estate for a little while after shopping. There was something he thought she'd want to see. "What are you up to, Harry?" she asked. "It's a surprise," he calmly replied. When she moved off to again join the other girl in walking and whispering to each other, Harry walked beside Isabel and said, "I hope you don't mind, but I asked Daphne to invite Tracy back to the estate for a short while." "Oh?" she asked. "And why did you do that?" "Because I think there's something she'd like to see, but I have to talk to Cygnus about it first," he replied. Thinking for a few moments while she watched him, she said, "If it's what I think it is, then I'd say that would be a very nice thing to do. Cygnus should be in his study by the time we return." "Thank you, Isabel," he gratefully said. When they stepped back through the flue into Greengrass estate, the two oldest girls dashed up to Daphne's room while Astoria went to her own. Isabel led Harry through to Cygnus's study. Knocking on the open door to the study, Isabel said, "My lord, Mr. Potter would like a word, if he may."
"Oh?"
replied Cygnus from where he was sitting behind a large ornate desk, surprised by the formal announcement of his wife. "Then do come in, Mr. Potter, and how may I help you?" Harry stepped into the study and approached the desk. Steeling himself a little, he gave a little bow and said, "Lord Greengrass, it has come to my attention. As per the old ways, it is customary for the prospective groom of a betrothal contract to present a suitable ring to his prospective bride. I come before you asking to present such a ring to Lady Daphne in recognition of our betrothal." Before Harry had even finished speaking, Cygnus was already grinning from ear to ear. As he'd finished, Cygnus pushed himself back from his desk, held out his hand palm up, and said, "Well, let's see it then." Harry drew the box forth from within his robes and, stepping forward, placed the box in the older man's hand. Cygnus opened the box, looked inside, and gave a low whistle in response. Looking back up at Harry, he offered the box back and said, "Very nice, Mr. Potter. As per the old ways, I deem it worthy to grace the finger of my daughter's hand." Then, relaxing a fair bit, he asked with a grin, "When do you want to present it to her?" Nervously, Harry replied, "I thought she might like Tracy here when I presented it to her, so I hope you don't mind if we do it now and get it over with." Chuckling, Cygnus replied, "That sounds like a nice idea. Allow me to summon the family." Turning his head slightly to the right, he summoned one of their house elves, Tinky. With a pop, the little being appeared alongside him and asked, "What can Tinky be doing for Master? Can you inform my wife, both daughters, and Daphne's friend Tracy to join us here in the study, please?" "Yes, Master," it said before disappearing with another pop. Harry had met a house elf for the first time when he visited the Longbottoms, and was at first surprised by their devotion. The next day he had read a bit on the small beings and their place in the wizarding world. Now he was accustomed to them, but vowed to treat them as honored members of family, unlike how he heard some families treated them. Moments later, Isabel entered the room, followed by the sounds of running feet, before Astoria walked in, pretending she hadn't just been running all the way to the door before walking in. Daphne and Tracy joined them less than a minute later. The three girls' faces showed questioning looks, while Isabel wore a slightly smug and knowing expression. "Daphne, come forward, please," instructed a lightly grinning Cygnus. With a curious expression, she stepped up near Harry. "The floor is yours, Mr. Potter," said Cygnus. With a nervous sub-vocalized sigh, Harry turned to Daphne and said, "Lady Daphne, it has come to my attention, as per the old ways, it is customary for the prospective groom of a betrothal contract to present a suitable ring to his prospective bride." He then dropped to one knee and offered the ring box to Daphne on the palm of his left hand, opening the lid with his right as he did so. Daphne's face morphed into one of complete shock, while Harry heard a muffled squeal from one of the girls standing apart. He didn't know which one, but didn't care, focused as he was on Daphne's face. Continuing, he said, "Please accept this ring as recognition of our betrothal, and do me the honor of wearing it, always." With the fingers of one hand covering her gaping mouth, Daphne reached out a shaking hand and lightly brushed both rings with her fingers. Pulling her hand back, she looked into Harry's eye and quickly nodded her head. Harry hoped she wasn't going to suddenly burst into tears. He didn't know what he'd do then. Gently, Harry pulled the box back towards him and withdrew the lady's ring with the fingers of his right hand. Almost subconsciously, he snapped the lid of the box shut again with his left hand and repocketed it. He then reached back forward with his left hand and took Daphne's left hand by a light grasp, pulling it up and forward. Changing his grip slightly on the ring, he gently slid the ring onto her left-hand ring finger and pushed it right back until it rested almost against the webbing. The ring gave a slight flash and resized itself to her finger. Then he reached back into his pocket and drew forth the box again, reopening it. "This ring is the partner to yours. With it, I signify to all that I am betrothed to you. I ask that you do me the honor of placing it on my ring finger." Daphne looked at him for a few moments before she reached in and drew the ring from the box. As soon as it cleared the box, Harry pulled it away and re-snapped the box lid shut, then switched it to his right hand before dropping it into a pocket. At the same time, he offered his left hand to Daphne, palm down, and waited for her to take it. Gently, almost slowly, Daphne altered her grip on the gold band before taking Harry's offered hand. He held his fingers a little splayed and slightly stiff to allow her to slide the ring onto his ring finger. She, too, slid the ring right back almost to the webbing between his fingers. As soon as she released it, Harry saw the flash and felt the slight warmth as it resized to fit comfortably. Then he stood up, took her left hand by the fingers, palm down, and drew her hand up as he leaned forward and gave the back of her knuckles a light kiss. Standing up straight again, he simply said, "Thank you." Surprising Harry, she lunged forward and grabbed him by each side of the head, half yanked him forward, and firmly planted a chaste kiss on his lips. Letting go of his face and backing off a little, she blushed, then proceeded to attempt to hug the stuffing out of him for a few moments. Just as suddenly she let him go and stood back. Her expression gave Harry the impression she was shocked by what she'd just done. "Tinky," he heard Cygnus call. "6 champagne fruits and a bottle of light champagne, please. The good stuff." That broke the spell on the young couple as the other 3 ladies all came forward with squeals to see the ring on Daphne's hand. Harry stepped back and turned towards her father, not a little in shock himself. Cygnus walked around his desk with a wide grin on his face and offered his hand to Harry to shake, who took it with gratitude. "Congratulations, my boy. That was very well done." The next thing Harry knew, he was wrapped in a hug by Isabel. "You did that really well, Harry. Clearly, you've been studying the old ways." With a sheepish grin as the woman backed off again, he said, "Yeah, I read a book on wizarding traditions and another on the ancient houses. Between them I learned what I needed to do and how to do it. An example of that perfect memory of yours, no doubt," she said, backing away. Harry was next grapple-hugged by the youngest Greengrass, who made a squeeze sound as she did. She then stood up straight and planted a kiss on his cheek before backing off. "You're going to make it hard for any suitors for me to measure up to your standard, you know," she mock-scolded him. Harry grinned at her and said, "They'd have to at least measure up to my standard to be considered even close to be worthy of you, my fair maiden." After a hesitant look of surprise at Harry, she turned to her father and said, Oh, he did it again. That earned Harry another grapple hug by the younger girl before she suddenly released him and went back for another look at Daphne's ring. Cygnus gave a little chuckle before he started handing out partially full champagne flutes to everyone. After a toast to the couple, Cygnus chivied the ladies out of the room and offered Harry a seat at the occasional table in the other half of the room. Cygnus took the other one. Both were still sipping at their champagnes. It's my understanding the Potters were in the habit of charming their betrothal rings beyond the standard auto-resizing and anti-theft charms. Is it the same with your two? Asked Cygnus. Harry nodded and said, besides those, both rings have poison and harmful potion detectors that will cause the stones to glow on both rings, detection charms against the wearer being hit with curses, and jinxes that will cause both rings to vibrate, as well as some small level of protection against both. There's also a peril detector that monitors the wearer's heartbeat and adrenaline levels. If either or both suddenly spike, it'll be detected, and the rings will intermittently vibrate, and both rings provide some level of detection and counter against mind-altering curses, such as the imperious, confounding, and obliviation curses, and cause both rings to double-tap vibrate. Finally, there's a tracking charm on both rings that allows the other to track and find the partner. It's not long distance, but it's good enough for Hogwarts. If I thought there was any other protective charms I could think of to add to the rings, I'd have them installed in a heartbeat. I'm still wondering if there could be a minimal notice me not charm that was intent-based that could be added, but the jeweler said he was still working on one that would be effective. And why present the rings now? Asked Cygnus. Though I suspect I know why. I'd like you to confirm it for me. It's a combination of what I've read, what I've heard, and what I suspect from my gut feelings, replied Harry. First, our betrothal will not remain secret for long. I'm the supposed boy who lived, so I'm considered newsworthy for that alone. I'm the new head of a noble and most ancient house, and apparently the heir presumptive to another, the Blacks, and now betrothed to the heiress of a third. Apparently just 2 of those 3 is very rare and always makes the front page of the Wizarding World's newspapers when it's discovered. All 3 is unheard of. The Potters are considered a lighthouse, while the Greengrasses are, erroneously in my opinion, considered grey, if not dark. So there's obviously going to be quite a few people unhappy to learn of such a relationship between our 2 houses. Such an alliance will, no doubt, upset the balances of power in everything from the Wizengamot down. I've learned there are quite a few people from all levels of society who would otherwise actively work towards snagging the supposed boy who lived in an informal alliance, if not locked into a marriage contract with a daughter, or even a son of their house. The jeweler even said, and I quote, I dare say there will be many a young witch, and possibly some young wizards, who will be most distraught when it is learned you are betrothed and off the market, so to speak. And finally, neither of us are stupid enough not to believe there are Voldemort sympathizers who remain at large who would like nothing better than to harm me, in any way, in the name of their master. Daphne is about to become too big and too easy a target, even though Hogwarts is supposedly the safest place in Britain, and it behooves me to protect her. I just hope I can. Is that how you saw it, sir? Harry finally asked. With a small snort in response, Cygnus replied, Actually, your response was even more than my own suspicions. Plus, you've given me a few things to think about. Harry allowed the man his thoughts while he sat there thinking about how his life had changed so much over the past month and a half. He'd gone from being a poor boy who was forced to be the slave of a middle-class British Muggle family and forced to bed in a cupboard under the stairs, to the head of a noble and most ancient house, heir to another, betrothed to the heiress of a third, destined to become a lord in his own right, and one of the richest people in Britain, Muggle or magical. Interrupting his thoughts, Cygnus said, There's something you said I hope you could clarify for me. Harry nodded and said, If I can, of course. You said you were the heir presumptive of the House of Black. It is my understanding that position resides with young Draco Malfoy of the magical House of Malfoy. His mother, Narcissa, is a daughter of the Blacks. Harry frowned and said, From what I understand, the heirship comes to me through 2 paths. Firstly, I'm the great-grandson of Doria Potter née Black, who was the youngest sister of Pollux Black, the great-grandfather of Scion Malfoy. That means we're equally positioned to become the next Lord Black, and it makes us cousins of sorts. Secondly, the goblins informed me my godfather, Sirius Orion Black, named me as his heir sometime during late 1980 or early 1981. And Sirius Black, according to the goblins, is the rightful Lord Black, irrespective of his current accommodations within Azkaban, since the passing of his grandfather, Arcturus Black, a few months ago. Frowning, Cygnus said, "That should not be possible. Being convicted and sentenced to Azkaban of a crime that would see him spend the rest of his life behind bars should see him magically stripped of any claim to the lordship and it passed on to the next in succession. That would be you and would mean you would also now be the head of House Black." "And that's what's got me confused," said Harry. "When I raised that exact point with Bloodfang, the Potter account keeper, he basically stared right at me and said in a very deliberate manner, Sirius Orion Black inherited the title of Lord Black on the death of his grandfather on the 31st of March. This year, he is currently residing in Azkaban, and he is currently the Lord Apparent for the noble and most ancient House of Black. I want to be very clear with my words here, Mr. Potter, and hope you understand what I am telling you. I have this sneaking suspicion, no, I'm sure of it. He was trying to tell me something important, and I'm not knowledgeable enough of the wizarding world to understand what he was trying to tell me. When I tried to get him to clarify his remark, he clammed up and said he was bound by both treaty and client confidentiality not to say any more. I think he was also somewhat disappointed in me that I had to ask. Frowning still, Cygnus said, "Leave it with me, I'll research the Wizengamot and ministry records to try and find out why magic still recognizes him as Lord Apparent for the noble and most ancient House of Black. It's the only reason why the goblins would still recognize him as such." "Might I also suggest raising the matter with Madame Bones?" asked Harry. "I formally re-established the long-term alliance between House Potter and House Bones a couple days ago, with her as both Regent Bones on behalf of her niece, Susan, and head of the DMLE. Channels for information may become more open to you." Cygnus smiled back and said, "I do believe you are far more Slytherin than you believe, Harry. I fear it will be a great loss to my old house if you're sorted into another." With a matching grin of his own, Harry replied, "Perhaps, but how much Slytherin of me would it be if I managed to get myself sorted into another house?" Cygnus burst into laughter. "I so look forward to the day you take seat in the Wizengamot, Harry." By the time a house elf popped in to inform them dinner was ready in the informal dining area, both heads felt they had gone a long way towards establishing a long-term friendship on top of the formal alliance. It never really occurred to Cygnus that he was creating such a friendship with an 11-year-old. During dinner, where Tracy had asked for and received permission to join them from her father via Flu, Harry found himself sitting next to Daphne, while Tracy and Astoria sat opposite. Cygnus and Isabel sat at either end of the table. Throughout the courses, Tracy bombarded him near mercilessly about his life to that point. Harry only said he was raised in the Muggle world and gave some information about his experiences living as a Muggle. She also asked him why he'd decided to live for the last 6 weeks at the Leaky Cauldron, and Harry said it was so he had ready access to material he could source to learn about life and his place in it in the wizarding world. He explained about his first day back in the wizarding world, from hopping off the underground and walking into the Leaky Cauldron, to visiting Gringotts, learning of his heritage and the betrothal contract, generalizations of his letters from his parents, his experiences talking with the various shopkeepers, why he'd chosen to use an alias, and how he felt about everything. In response, Harry asked questions about growing up in the wizarding world, what kids did for fun, asked about the rules governing underage magic, wondered why he hadn't received a howler from that department when he was practicing the minor charms and cantrips he was using to conceal his identity, and was told it was because Diagon Alley couldn't be monitored because there was too much magic in that small an area, and that the same restrictions couldn't be applied to homes as heavily warded as the Greengrass estate. Asked about other methods of travel within the wizarding world besides flu travel, and generally gave as good as he got. As dessert was being served, Tracy flat out asked him, to the shock of the Greengrasses, if he knew what really happened on the night of 31st October 1981. So Harry, as emotionlessly as possible, gave a full accounting of what he knew happened and when. "But that's not what the books say," exclaimed Tracy. Harry gave a little snort of amusement and said, "I want you to think about this for a minute or two. The only people present on that night were James and Lily Potter, me, Voldemort," and heard a few gasps of shock at his casual mention of the name, but he ignored it, and apparently Sirius Black, though I did not really see him. Of those people, only Sirius Black and I lived through the experience, and Black was apparently sent directly to Azkaban. That leaves only me. And I can assure you, nobody has approached me to ask what happened on that night until you just did. That being the case, just where did all those writers get their information on which to base their books? The entire table stopped to think about that for a little while. "But how do you remember so much?" she asked. "As I explained to Isabel, Daphne, and Astoria this afternoon, I have a very good memory honed by meditation and built upon by occlumency. I don't want it bandied about," he said, looking very directly at Tracy, "but I have what's called an eidetic memory, perfect recall. I remember everything that's happened in my life, excluding those periods when I was asleep or unconscious." With a bit of a snort, he said, "I even have what I feel are memories from when I was in the womb, and of my own birth." With a bit of a shudder, he said, "That particular memory I have stored back in the recesses of my mind and locked away in a mental safe." "Sweet Merlin," exclaimed Cygnus. Sitting forward, he asked, "Do you remember me?" "Yes," replied Harry. "You visited my mum and me in the hospital on what I think was the day after I was born. You came in with Isabel," he said, indicating the lady at the other end of the table, "and she was carrying a bundle of green blankets with silver trim in her left arm, from which I saw a small baby's face with a dusting of fine blonde hair. He grinned at Daphne and said, 'You were a very cute baby,' but Daphne just stared back in shock. Turning back to Cygnus, he said, 'You leaned over me and said to my mum that I had her eyes. I remember reaching out and grabbing you by a fistful of your goatee and giving it a bit of a yank.' Laughing, he continued, 'The look on your face when I did that still makes me laugh.' Isabel burst into laughter and said, 'Yes, and he immediately shaved it off that night, and hasn't had one since.' Still in shock, but also showing signs of amusement, Cygnus said, 'It bloody hurt.' Leaning back, he looked directly at Harry and said, 'That's an incredible ability, Harry, and I think it's wise of you not to want it spread about that you have it.' Nodding, Harry said, 'I think I have enough on my plate to deal with as the so-called boy who lived. I don't want to also be known as the boy who remembers everything. Besides, once some of the teachers at my old Muggle school found out I had perfect recall, their attitudes towards me changed. If I didn't get perfect marks on exams that basically parroted information we already knew, they kind of scolded me and said they were disappointed. No one can be perfect all the time, and I was trying to hide my ability. You would also have lots of kids coming to you for the answers to any questions on their schoolwork they had," said Daphne. "I did," nodded Harry. "It didn't take me long to realize I could earn a few pounds, Muggle currency, by offering my services for a fee. I don't know if it's right to tell you, but I used to have a small network of agents who would act as my intermediaries in selling my services to the rest of the student population. I used to charge a fee based on the student's year for my services in writing their assignments for them. It also used to humor me that one of my biggest customers was my own cousin, Dudley. My agents would come to me in my space in the library, which everyone knew I had basically claimed as my own, with information on what the assignment was supposed to be about, and the fee charged. I'd complete the assignment in the kid's name, and the agent would take it back to the student. For their services as go-between, I paid the agent a 10% commission. The agents had 2 mandatory rules. Don't tell anyone my identity, and never try to rip me off. I used to use others to test the honesty of the agents. It took me only having to sack 2 of them for the others to know I found out who was ripping me off pretty quickly. During the whole time I was doing that, only 2 of my agents were ever busted by the teachers, and neither of them ratted me out. And none of the teachers ever figured out I was the one doing the assignments. It was the money I raised doing that for the last couple years of my Muggle schooling that I used to buy school supplies for myself, and ultimately used to get myself on public transport from my relative's house to the Leaky Cauldron on that first day. By the time Harry finished his short tale of questionable legal acts in heading his own minor crime syndicate, Cygnus was roaring with laughter. "Harry James Potter," he crowed, "head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter, secretly head of a petty criminal organization," and started roaring with laughter again. "Well, I wasn't actually doing anything illegal," Harry said a bit sheepishly. "What I would do was always write using a yellow legal pad for the paper and in green ink. Each page was also stamped with the notations sample only top and bottom. If it ever did end up getting back to me, I knew I could always claim I was only writing a sample assignment for the student. How was I to know they'd rewrite it in their own hand on their own paper and submit it under their own name? I could have even claimed the student plagiarized me. Besides, who could ever really believe that a 3rd or 4th grade student was writing top-line assignments for a 6th grade student? Especially one who, through his own grades, was a pretty poor student. Cygnus was still laughing. He even had tears in his eyes. Are you sure you're not bound for Slytherin?" he asked. "Nah," replied a grinning Harry. "Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff. Then I'll work at secretly taking over the school hidden within the House of the Ravens, or Badgers using cunning and guile. No one will ever suspect me. Mwah-ha." That just set Cygnus off again. After dinner, Tracy headed for home, while Astoria and Daphne headed upstairs to their rooms. Before he got a chance to leave, Isabel asked him to remain at the table for a few minutes. Cygnus, not know what was going on, looked at his wife with a curious expression. Isabel sat next to Harry and said, "Harry, I know you don't want to go over all that information you provided the girls and I this afternoon, but I think Cygnus needs to hear it for himself." Harry just nodded back with a bit of a sheepish expression. "Have you ever heard of a pensieve, Harry?" she asked. Frowning, Harry replied, "No, sorry, what's a pensieve?" A pensieve is a magical device that allows a person to share their memories with another. They can do everything from giving the person a full, immersive experience of the memory, to just displaying the memory like a ghostly form above the surface of the pensieve, she explained. "Okay," said Harry. "I guess I can understand what you mean." "Good," she said, "because what I want to do is show Cygnus my memories of what you told us this afternoon in our family pensieve. Would it be okay with you if I did that?" "Yeah, that'd be all right," said Harry. "I guess it would save me from having to tell it all again, I suppose." "Yes, my thoughts, exactly," she said. "I don't have to be here for it, do I?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I just thought it would be polite to ask you for your permission for me to do so first. After all, it's your information to share." "Thank you," said Harry. "In that case, I don't have a problem with it." Getting up from the table, he said, "While you're doing that, I need to meditate for a while. I'll be in the guest room if you need me." Nodding, she said, "Thank you, Harry, and good night." "Good night, Harry," said Cygnus. "Good night," Harry called back over his shoulder as he walked out. Turning back to look at his wife, Cygnus asked, "So, in the study?" Rising back up from her chair, Isabel said, "In the study," and led her husband from the room. After the pensieve was brought out from its custom-made drawer in the study bookcases, Cygnus placed it carefully on the corner of his desk. Isabel touched her wand tip to her temple, frowned a bit, and slowly drew the tip away from where it touched her skin. As she did so, a gossamer-like glowing mass of something resembling partway between cotton wool and string came with it. She gently transferred it into the liquid kept within the birdbath-shaped stone pensieve and indicated to her husband to join her. Together, they dropped into the pensieve to watch the memory Isabel had just transferred there. When they came back out some time later, Cygnus walked around and plonked himself onto his office chair. Frowning, he asked, "He's slowly opening up to us about his life with his relatives, isn't he?" Nodding, Isabel replied, "Yes, but he's going to need to do it at his own pace. I don't think he consciously thought to reveal as much to us as he did this afternoon. And I think he only said what he said to put Daphne more at ease." "Those were my thoughts as well," said Cygnus. Leaning forward again, he said, "And speaking about what he reveals, I think I should show you the memory of what we discussed in here after you ladies left that little ring ceremony he performed." "You're not worried he'd be upset you're sharing it with me?" she asked. "No, I doubt much gets past our young Mr. Potter," he replied. "I dare say he expects me to share it with you." Then Cygnus used his own wand to extract a memory and allowed it to drop into the bowl of the pensieve. Once it was in, they both dropped their faces in after it. While the Greengrass parents were downstairs in the study using the pensieve, Harry was in his room getting ready for bed and to meditate. He first checked to ensure Hedwig was comfortable on her perch, and that the window was a little open for her to leave during the night and hunt. He made sure she had owl treats and replaced her water, and checked to see if she was suffering any from her new harness. When he was satisfied, he returned to his trunk and brought out his pajamas, laying them on the bed, and headed into the bathroom to brush his teeth for the night. When he came out, he saw Daphne sitting on his bed, clearly waiting for him. She was absent-mindedly twiddling her new ring and using her upper teeth to worry at her bottom lip. She was wearing a set of pale blue pajamas, short-sleeved and shorts. Harry smiled and said, "What can I do for you, Daphne?" "Get changed into your pajamas first," she said. "Then we can talk." With a grin, he said, "Yes, ma'am." "Pratts," she absent-mindedly replied. He picked up his pajamas off the bed and took them with him into the bathroom to get changed. Before returning to the bedroom, he left his dirty clothes on the floor in the bathroom. Re-entering the bedroom, he walked around the foot of the bed where she was sitting and climbed up onto the bed to sit cross-legged on top of the blankets near the pillow end. Meanwhile, Daphne moved to sit with her legs tucked under herself on the foot of the bed facing him. She kept her head down. "Firstly," she said, "I want to thank you for the ring. It's really beautiful." "You're most welcome," replied Harry. "I was worried you wouldn't like it because they weren't your colors or something." Her head shot up to look at him and she said, "Oh no, I love sapphires. It's my favorite gemstone because blue's my favorite color. I picked it because I think the stone is a perfect complement to your eyes," said Harry, "and the white gold of the band better suits your skin tone." "I know," she softly said, looking closer at the ring. "It's perfect." "I also wanted to thank you for the ring," she continued, "because it'll make life easier for me in Slytherin. If you get into Slytherin, that is." "Yeah, if," she agreed. "This will stop those in there who will try to use their family positions against me, especially the boys." "They had best not attempt it," growled Harry, "and I want you to immediately let me know if anyone does attempt anything, all right?" Looking back up at Harry again, she shyly nodded. "I also wanted to know if I could borrow that book on occlumency you have," she asked. "Daddy and Mummy have been teaching it to me, but I want to see if there's anything else in the book I can use towards building my mental shields." With a shrug, Harry replied, "Of course," and clambered off the bed. Unlocking his trunk to the correct side, he quickly found the right book and offered it to her before re-locking the trunk and returning to his place on the bed. "Thank you, Harry," she said, looking down at the book now in her lap. "You're welcome," he replied. Sensing the girl wanted to talk to him about something else, Harry decided to lead the conversation by asking about her other friends. "Well, of course, about Tracy. Then there's Susan Bones, the heiress to the noble and most ancient house of Bones, and Hannah Abbott of the noble and ancient house of Abbott. At least, they're the core group of my friends. There are other kids our age of whom I'm on friendly terms, but we're not close enough to be asked as individuals around to each other's homes. We're not seen as a lighthouse, so many light families are wary of letting their kids mix with us, and Daddy doesn't want us to have too much to do with the dark families in case we're seen as dark ourselves. It's mainly kids of families that don't care about the light and dark divide we mainly mix with, and that includes Tracy and the few others." "And what about me?" asked Harry. "The Potters are supposedly a light family, and yet here I am staying with you." Smiling at him, she said, "The betrothal contract renders the distinction between light, grey, and dark moot. No ancient house would ever question you're firmly under the protection of House Greengrass due to the betrothal contract, just as I fall under the protection of House Potter. I dare say Regent Bones and Madame Longbottom would have been quite opposed to you spending even an evening with us alone if not for the betrothal." Daddy doesn't know or remember what was going through his head when he signed the betrothal contract, but he suspects it had to do with trying to more closely align House Greengrass with the light without openly coming out in support of the light against you-know-who. By tradition, betrothal contracts have always been a protected way by which a house can shift its loyalties, if only temporarily. Harry sighed and shook his head. It all sounds so overly simplistic. We're 11 years old, and yet because we're born into a certain house, we're already judged on something that should be based on an individual's developed personality from the moment of our birth. I've also had it impressed upon me that the Potters are a lighthouse. However, from what I've read and heard from others, I don't see myself as light. I see myself more as light grey, if not fully grey. There are just too many collective views of the light that I simply cannot see myself agreeing with or supporting. And, besides, there's no way I can see myself aligning House Potter with the light as long as Albus Bloody Dumbledore is the recognized leader of the light. I'm pretty sure Daddy sees House Greengrass the same way, said Daphne softly. Daphne left a few minutes later, and Harry settled down into his meditative state in a lotus position. He was deep into his mind when Cygnus and Isabel came by later to check and ensure the kids were all abed. On the morning of the ride to Hogwarts, Harry was sitting at the informal dining table, reading that morning's Daily Prophet and sipping on a mug of coffee. He could hear Daphne calling out to Isabel, trying to find this or that, and otherwise being in a frazzled state, finalizing her packing. Harry's trunk was already packed with everything bar Hedwig's cage stowed inside. His trunk with Hedwig's cage on top was sitting ready to go near the flue. Harry himself was already dressed, with his school robes lying on the top layer inside his trunk, ready to be taken out and donned. He'd also made a last-minute inspection of Hedwig to ensure her health, and would shortly send her winging her way to Hogwarts in advance. He felt it was a better idea than forcing her to endure being caged on the express. Cygnus was sitting opposite, reading his own copy of the Daily Prophet and sipping on a cup of tea. Suddenly, Daphne burst in through the door and blurted to Harry, "Harry, there's not enough room in my trunk. Can I put some stuff in yours?" "Sure, why not?" he calmly replied. "You have access to it now. Why not put some of your non-school uniform clothes in there, and put the set of uniform you want to change into on the train on top? That way you won't need to open your trunk on the train." She thought furiously for a few moments before suddenly launching herself forward and planting a smooch on Harry's cheek. "Thanks, Harry, you're the best," and dashed back out of the room again. Harry just sat there a bit stunned. Cygnus saw the expression on his face and snorted in amusement. "Did she just do what I think she just did?" asked Harry with no small amount of wonder. "Kissed you?" "Yeah, she did," replied Cygnus. Snuffled Harry. "I'll just have to do something nice for her more often then, if that's how she's going to repay me." Cygnus chuckled in response. After Daphne had moved through the estate like a whirling dervish, she was soon packed and ready to go. As it was a Sunday, Cygnus was able to join them on the trip. Stepping onto the platform through the barrier, Harry's senses were assaulted by the smell of burning coal, the tang of steam, and the sounds of lots of children and their parents both greeting each other and saying their goodbyes. Harry had no sooner come to a halt, looking about in wonder, when he was hit by a trolley to the back of his legs from behind. He hadn't moved out of the way of the barrier quickly enough, and someone coming through from the other side wasn't able to stop in time before hitting him. "Sorry," he muttered over his shoulder. He then followed the Greengrasses further onto the platform. Though walking with a little bit of a limp, he was annoyed with himself for not considering it was likely to happen. Once away from the barrier, he asked Daphne if there was any particular spot where she'd be meeting up with Tracy. "No," she replied. "What about you with Susan and Neville?" Harry just shook his head and said, "We just agreed to meet up on the train, and whoever was here first would find a compartment for us." With a wry smile, she said, "In that case, you'd best leave your trunk and cage here and go and have a look. You really don't want to be dragging either down the length of the train, do you?" "Actually, that's a good idea," he replied. "You don't mind?" "No," she said. "Besides, I don't want to be dragging my trunk down the length of the train either." "Okay, I'll be as quick as I can." Turning to the Cygnus and Isabel, he said, "I'm just going to search the train for our friends and be right back, all right?" "All right, Harry," replied Isabel with a smile. "Apparently we're waiting here for Tracy, anyway." Harry quickly ducked away and boarded the train via the first carriage. Then he proceeded down the length of the train, looking into compartments as he went. About 10 minutes later, he reached the caboose car and turned about, walking back up the length of the train again, peering into compartments as he went. Hopping back off the train, he quickly approached the Greengrasses, since joined by the Devises, and said, "They're not on the train yet, but compartments are starting to be reserved pretty quickly. I suggest we board now and claim one for our own." "Put your trunks on board and come back out," said Cygnus. "I want to introduce you to a few people, Harry." Harry gave a nod and grabbed the handle of Daphne's trunk. He put that onto the carriage floor just inside the door and allowed her to pass, then grabbed Tracy's trunk and did the same for her. Once he was satisfied the girls were organized, he picked up the handle of his own trunk and put that inside before stepping past. With Hedwig's cage in one hand and gripping the handle of one end of his trunk with the other, he followed the girls. The girls led him through a couple of carriages before they selected one, indicating for him to precede them inside. Inside, he glanced around before realizing the trunks went into the overhead racks. He picked his up and shoved it onto the rack, then looked to see both girls trying to act coquettish and indicating their own trunks. With a sigh, he had soon manhandled both trunks up and alongside his own. "Thank you, Harry," said Daphne after giving him a flirty little kiss on the cheek. Tracy followed it up with one of her own. "You do realize your trunks," he said, "even though they have featherweight charms on them, are still exceedingly difficult to maneuver up onto those racks, right?" "Yes, Harry, but that's why we have you to handle them for us, right?" said Daphne, as if it explained everything. Before Harry could respond, Tracy said, "Come on. You promised to rejoin the families back on the platform, so Uncle Cygnus can introduce you to people," and walked off, closely followed by Daphne. Harry sighed and followed them off back to the others. Back on the platform, Cygnus managed to introduce Harry to no less than a dozen people. Harry worked hard mentally to remember faces and associate names with them. He also stored in his mind the little facts about them which Cygnus mentioned. One was a hard worker within the misuse of magic office at the ministry. That person was an import-exporter of rare potion ingredients. Another was an ally on the Wizengamot. While Cygnus was busy introducing Harry to what he felt was everyone, Susan turned up with her aunt in tow, closely followed by Neville and Gran. Daphne and Tracy took the pair of them on board to show them the compartment they'd snagged, while Aunt Amelia and Gran spoke with Cygnus, Isabel and Tracy's parents. Then they also started introducing Harry to people they thought he should get to know. By the time it was almost 11 a.m., Harry was having trouble trying to maintain focus on what he was doing, and he was feeling a little irritable from it. The first 5-minute warning whistle, indicating the train was about to depart, was heard from the engine, and Harry was happy to escape back to the train. However, just as he was about to board, he was interrupted by a family full of redheads that had just turned up. He was almost rudely yanked back from stepping on board by the oldest boys, one of which said, "Hang on there a tick, old chap. Mind giving us a hand with our trunks?" With a sigh, Harry quickly assisted them loading 4 school trunks onto the train before being able to step on board himself. "Thanks much, kind sir," said one of them, before he had a chance to move away down the passageway. One redhead, one of a set of twins, looked more closely at him and said, "Oi, you're Harry Potter." "Yes," said Harry in response before he was finally able to get free of the rabid redheads. He quickly moved down the passageway and entered the cabin where he'd first stored his, Daphne's and Tracy's trunks, and with a sigh, collapsed onto one of the seats. It was bad enough trying to remember all the names, faces and details of the people Cygnus, Aunt Amelia and Gran introduced me to. I then had to run into a rabble of redheads as I was trying to board the train, he grumped. "Rabble of redheads?" asked Susan. "I think he means the Weasleys," replied Neville with a bit of an embarrassed chuckle. "When I stuck my head out the window, it was to tell Harry to hurry up. However, he was already about to board. That's when the Weasleys intercepted him and made him help load their trunks before he could get on board." "Yeah," said Harry. "Some people seem to think my name is Porter instead of Potter." "Oh, poor baby," mock-simpered Tracy. The train had only just begun moving and he was about to retaliate against Tracy when they were joined by a thin young blonde girl with hair in pigtails. Harry had never met before. "Hi," she said, stepping over legs and sitting next to Susan. Susan said, "Harry, this is my friend Hannah Abbott. Hannah, this is also my friend Harry Potter." Hannah looked at him in shock and squeaked, "Really?" Harry replied, "Yes, I'm really Susan's friend." Hannah had the grace to blush. "Sorry," she said. Harry smiled back and said, "No, I should be, and am." Susan and Hannah then engaged in a quietly spoken discussion about girl things and what they'd been up to over the past few days since they'd last seen each other. Neville was having trouble keeping his pet toad from jumping out of the compartment or into trouble anywhere else, so he got down Hedwig's cage and gave it to the other boy. "Put Trevor in this, Neville," he said. "It'll keep you from losing him." Gratefully, Neville quickly accepted the cage and suggestion, housing the toad locked inside. Harry was feeling a little irritated about the day already, so sat back with the intention of mediating for a while. However, before he had a chance to sink into it, the door was yanked open by the smallest of the aforementioned redheads. The boy took a look around before his eyes alighted on Harry. Stepping through the door, he said, "Can I sit here? Everywhere else is full." Harry stared back at him, annoyed his meditation was interrupted by him. "No, it's not. I just walked past a good half-dozen compartments that had less people in them than we already have in here. I do not like liars." They have Slytherins in them," the boy tried again. "They're in here too," Daphne snapped back. But that's Harry Potter," the boy stuttered, pointing at Harry. "He can't be sitting with snakes. It's not right." "And now we come to the heart of the truth," snarled Harry. "You don't want to sit in here because everywhere else is full. You want to sit in here because Harry Potter's in here. Well, Harry Potter's not interested in sitting with a liar. Now, get out before you find yourself thrown out." With a face reddening with either embarrassment or rage, or a combination of both, the boy muttered something about arrogant gits and fame's gone to his head, before he backed out and slammed the door shut behind him. Harry watched him stomp off down the passageway, dragging his trunk behind him. Sitting back with his eyes closed, Harry said, "Sorry, he pushed all my buttons, that one." "That one was Ron Weasley," said Susan, also upset. "He's the youngest of 6 boys. His only sister is the only one younger than him in their family of 7 kids. His father works for my auntie and heads the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. I've met him at various DMLE parties over the years. He's a greedy guts when it comes to food, and is often jealous of what other people have. I suggest staying well away from him." "I, for one, intend to," said Harry. After managing to lightly meditate for a while and get a bit of a handle on his rising temper, they were next interrupted by a young bushy-haired girl already wearing her school robes, who appeared to be upset. Knocking on the door before opening it, she asked in a soft voice, "Can I sit in here, please?" Susan took one look at her and said, "Come in and take a seat." The girl entered and sat next to Susan, sniffling a bit. "What happened?" Susan asked in a gentle voice. "These older girls up there," she indicated towards the front carriages of the train, "called me names when I said my parents were Muggles. Then they threw me out of the compartment. I don't know what I did wrong," the girl sobbed. "Nothing," said Daphne. "You did nothing wrong. You will find, Miss Granger," the girl replied, "Hermione Granger. You will find, Miss Granger, that there are those in the wizarding world who allow their bigotry to rule their lives. They think of Muggleborns, such as yourself, as beneath them. That just makes them idiots," Daphne calmly said. "However, because you're a Muggleborn, I'm afraid you're going to have to get used to dealing with the likes of them. It's the same bigotry that has white people call black people gollywogs in the Muggle world." "How do you deal with it?" Hermione asked Daphne. "I don't have to," replied Daphne. "I'm what's known as a pure blood. I can trace my family on both sides back many wizarding generations. The same applies to Susan and Neville," she said, indicating the 2 of them. "Tracy and Harry here, on the other hand, are what's known as half-bloods. 1 wizarding line, 1 Muggle line, and I'm Daphne, by the way." After looking around as Daphne indicated the others in the room, Hermione's eyes rested with a quizzical look on Harry. Suddenly, her eyes widened a little in surprise. "You're Harry Potter," she exclaimed. "I've read all about you," and her voice trailed off. As soon as Hermione exclaimed, "You're Harry Potter," Harry's expression changed to one of great disappointment. He dropped his chin to his chest and groaned. Realizing she'd just done something wrong, she said, I guess that wasn't the right thing to say. I'm sorry." Her face screwed up and it looked like she was going to cry again as she too dropped her chin to her chest. Sighing, Harry looked up and said, "Sorry, you weren't to know. I just do not like being considered famous." Looking up with tears in her eyes, Hermione near plaintively asked, "Why ever not?" "Think about why it is I'm famous," said Harry. You're supposed to be the boy who lived, the one who killed Voldemort," replied Hermione. She didn't see most of the others wince at her casual mention of the name. "Am I?" asked Harry. "No, I see it as I'm famous for what happened on the night of the 31st of October 1981. The night my parents were brutally murdered by a psychotic sociopath, right in front of my infant eyes. The night I became a lonely orphan. Every time someone harps on about the boy who lived, I'm reminded of my parents' murder." "Oh God," exclaimed Hermione. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think—" Harry held up a hand to forestall any more. "No one really ever does see it from my side," he softly said. "They just don't think it through. For them, the 31st of October is a day of joyous celebration, the day the threat of Voldemort was removed from their lives. For me, it's one of self-pity and sorrowful memoria." When he finished speaking, Daphne leaned into him and softly planted a kiss on his cheek. "Thank you, Harry," she said. "Thank you for helping me understand it from your point of view." Harry just gently nodded as he blushed a little. Hermione softly said, "None of the books about that night or about you ever mention that side of it." Harry gently snorted and said, "You shouldn't rely too much on what's written in books, Miss Granger. Most of them are lies and half-truths anyway." "No," said Hermione, "I don't mean those silly novels like Harry Potter and the Bashful Banshee. I mean The Boy Who Lived, our youngest hero. That one says it's a true and accurate recollection of the days leading up to the event itself, and the days following." Harry snorted and said, "I've read it, Miss Granger. I've even got a copy of it in my trunk. It's pretty much a complete pile of hippogriff crap. All the books are." "What?" asked Hermione, completely confused. "No, but it can't be," Tracy said. "Think about it, Miss Granger. The only person who was there and lived through the event and didn't end up locked away in prison is Harry, and no one has ever approached Harry to ask for his recollections of the event." "Ergo," said Daphne, taking it up, "no one has given their recollection of the events, who was actually there, to the author of the book. So ask yourself this: how were they able to get the information to report it as an accurate recollection?" "But," spluttered Hermione, "they lied." "Indeed," said Daphne quite calmly. "Indeed they did. I think I'll be asking for my money back," huffed the young girl. Harry chuckled and said, "That's actually not a bad idea." After things started to settle down again and the others were talking amongst themselves, Harry again tried to meditate for a while. He was yet again interrupted by the door being yanked open. 3 boys stood in the doorway. The one front and center was of average height, but was slender in comparison to the 2 apes stood behind him. He had pale, slender features, almost effeminate, with white blonde hair slicked back. Harry wondered how much hair gel the boy went through in a week. "Is it true?" the blonde boy asked, looking directly at Harry. "They're saying all down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment." "So it's you, is it?" "Really?" asked Harry. "And how would they know that?" He was looking at the other boys. Both of them were thick-set and looked extremely mean, though dense. Standing either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguards. "Oh, this is Crabbe and this is Goyle," said the boy, carelessly flicking his hand to indicate each, ignoring Harry's question but noticing where he was looking. "And my name's Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." Neville gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snigger. Draco Malfoy looked at him. "Oh," Malfoy sneered at Neville. "It's you, Squib." Turning back to Harry, he said, "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. Instead, Harry turned to Daphne and asked in as overly cultured a voice as he could manage, "Greengrass, do we know a Malfoy?" With her face schooled into a stone-like mask, Daphne considered the question for a while before replying with a similar voice, "Malfoy. A lesser house. His grandfather bought his lordship, if I recall, and his father reportedly has bought the ear of the minister. The family is somewhat wealthy, not in your league, of course. Oh, and he's a cousin of yours, or some such. At least his mother is a black. He might be worth knowing." Neville, Tracy, Susan and Hermione were all watching their byplay in shock. Malfoy had lowered his hand but still stood there trembling in a mixture of shame and rage. "A black, really?" asked Harry, feigning interest. "Not an heiress, was she?" "Merlin, no," replied Daphne. "Third daughter of a minor arm, if I remember correctly." Harry gave a big sigh and said, "Well, as he is a cousin of sorts, I suppose I should make an effort." He slowly rose to his feet and finally faced Malfoy. "I'm sure your mother, as she was a black, taught you better manners than to just barge into the compartment of your social betters without even knocking first. However, as you are a cousin, I suppose I can overlook your uncouth behavior and poor self-introduction for now. I am, indeed, Mr. Harry James Potter, head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter. I'm sure you're most pleased to finally meet me. And, as I'm currently sitting in a compartment and am friends with Mr. Neville Longbottom, heir apparent of the noble and most ancient house of Longbottom, Miss Daphne Greengrass, heiress presumptive of the noble and most ancient house of Greengrass, Miss Tracy Davis, heiress of the noble and most ancient house of Davis, Miss Susan Bones, heiress apparent of the noble and most ancient house of Bones, and Miss Hannah Abbott, heiress of the noble and ancient house of Abbott. As you can see, I have not made friends with the wrong sort, as you put it." Leaning forward slightly with his head cocked just so, he asked, "Will there be anything else, cousin?" Almost vibrating in anger and shame, Malfoy gritted out, "No," before stepping back out the door, slamming the door shut and storming off down the passageway. After he'd left, Harry flopped back into his seat and, chuckling, said, "That was kind of fun." A few moments later, Daphne burst into outright laughter and was soon followed by everyone except Hermione. She was trying not to smile but was in a bit of shock. "Sweet Merlin," said Daphne. "That went even better than I thought it would," and cracked up laughing again. Through her laughter, Tracy semi-accused, You had that planned, didn't you?" Trying to calm down again and wiping tears from her eyes, Daphne replied, "Yes. After I told Harry what sort of an arrogant ponce-git Malfoy was, he came up with the idea of being an even bigger ponce than he was and to out-arrogance him. We worked on it together and hoped the right people, meaning you lot, were all in place when ponce-git made his move." "You mean," asked Hermione, clearly trying to get her head around what she'd heard, "you people really are those titles? I mean, you're—" "Relax, Miss Granger," interrupted Daphne. "Yes, we are all heirs and heiresses of some very important families. Harry, however, is already the head of House Potter and has been for a few weeks since his 11th birthday. Tracy took it from there. What you see here, now that I think of it, is a very powerful block of very powerful families from within Wizarding Britain. Harry, once he reaches his majority, will become Lord Potter. Daphne, as his betrothed, will become Lady Potter when they marry, and mayhap Lady Greengrass Potter. Susan will become Lady Bones when she reaches her majority. My older brother will become Lord Davis when my father passes, and I might become Lady something else if I become betrothed to someone of equal or greater station. The same applies to Hannah, as she too has an older sibling." "Wow," said Hermione, "you're all like wizarding royalty." "Pretty much," said Harry with a bit of a shrug. "However, unlike the ponce-git by the name of Malfoy you just met, we don't put on the Ledidar airs those like him do. We prefer to be just ordinary folks. There's no need to rub someone's face in it, unless there's someone like Malfoy. And, why do you call each other by your first names and me as Miss Granger?" she timidly asked. "Ah," said Daphne. "That would be because you haven't given us leave to use your first name. It's considered rude in the wizarding world to use someone's first name when they've not given you leave to do so." "Oh, sorry," blushed Hermione. "Please call me Hermione. Everyone. Thank you, Hermione, replied Daphne with a slight nod. Have I done something wrong when I've used your first name? She asked worriedly. No, because you were introduced using first names only, replied Daphne. Don't worry, you caused no slight. However, it's something you should be aware of once we get to Hogwarts. Is there a book on this? She asked. That elicited a chuckle from almost everyone. There's many books on this, Tracy laughed. I have one in my trunk, said Harry. I'll get it out for you when we get changed into our school robes. So it's Mr. or Miss when introduced, but use first names when invited to do so. Anything else I should know so I don't make a fool of myself? Asked Hermione. Well, you're close. What you said applies to almost all occasions. However, on formal occasions, things change for those of us of noble lines, said Harry. Using Daphne here as an example, he said, she's Daphne. To those invited to use her given name in informal settings, she's Miss Greengrass. To those who haven't been invited to use her given name in informal settings, she's Lady Daphne. On some formal occasions, particularly conversationally, and she's Aris Greengrass for formal announcements and the like. Lady Greengrass is her mother, married to Lord Greengrass. If, perish the thought, Daphne's father passes, Lady Greengrass will become Dowager Lady Greengrass formally, and Dame Greengrass informally, and Daphne, on her majority before she marries me, will become Lady Greengrass. Now Susan, like me, is an orphan, and Susan's titling comes by way of her father. Even though there is no Lady Bones, at present Susan is still formally known as Lady Susan. The younger sister of her father, Amelia Bones, is Susan's current guardian. Now, Aunt Amelia is also head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the DMLE. As such, she holds a seat on the Wizengamot, the Wizarding World's Parliament, and becomes known informally as Madame Bones. Plus, she has also taken on the role as Susan's regent, and has taken seat on the Wizengamot in that role as well. So that also makes her, when it has to do with Wizengamot proceedings relating to House Bones or business matters relating to House Bones, Regent Bones. On the male side of the divide, it's no less murky. Let's take Neville, for example, to which Neville nodded. He was okay with it. Neville's father is still alive and is Lord Longbottom. However, Lord Longbottom is currently unable to attend to his duties. Though Neville is heir apparent, he is considered too young to take on those duties himself. So, his paternal grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, Dowager Lady Longbottom, is acting as both his guardian and regent. She currently sits the Wizengamot as Regent Longbottom. Neville is heir Longbottom, or Mr. Longbottom, and Augusta is Dowager Lady Longbottom, or Dame Longbottom, or just Madame Longbottom. Only her very closest friends and family ever get to call her anything else. That made Neville laugh. You got that right. Now my situation is rather unique. Looking around, Harry said, What I'm about to tell you is a closely guarded secret. Daphne, Neville and Susan are pretty much aware of this already, and the information is protected under house alliances, but I'm putting a great deal of trust in you, Tracy, Hannah and Hermione, to keep this to yourselves unless I specifically tell you otherwise, all right? You don't need a magical oath on it, do you? Asked Tracy, a little worried. No, just your word will do me, replied Harry. After the three gave it, he said, I'm Harry for invited informal, Mr. Potter for uninvited informal, and Heir Potter for formal. However, because I've already accepted the headship for House Potter, I may also be called Lord Potter as a mark of acknowledgement to my status on formal occasions. Once I attain my majority at 17 or I'm otherwise legally emancipated before then, I then properly become Lord Potter and may be referred to as the Potter. My current guardians are Muggles, and Albus Dumbledore has managed to get himself named as my magical guardian, and as neither my Muggle guardians nor Dumbledore were listed in my parents' will as who they designated for me to have as guardians, it appears he may done it illegally. However, though he claims to be my magical guardian, he is not acting as my regent. Instead, it appears he has appointed a proxy to my house seat, something of which I'm not bloody happy about, and something else which it appears he was not legally allowed to do so. But Albus Dumbledore is headmaster of Hogwarts, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, supreme mugwump of the ICW, and the leader of the Light," exclaimed Hermione. "How could he do such a thing?" "Yes, he's got everyone fooled, Hermione," growled Harry. "Lord Greengrass, Madam Bones, and Regent Longbottom all agree it sounds very dodgy, so they're currently researching through ministerial and Wizengamot records to unearth the truth. Furthermore, I've also discovered my godfather, Sirius Black, has also formally named me his heir." That drew a gasp from just about everyone but Hermione. Harry nodded and said, "According to the goblins, Sirius Black, though he currently resides in Azkaban, became Lord Apparent for the noble and most ancient House of Black when his grandfather passed on the 31st of March earlier this year." "But that's not possible," exclaimed Tracy, cutting in. "Anyone sentenced to life in Azkaban is automatically and magically stripped of being able to hold a lordship." "We know," replied Harry. "That's yet another issue. Lord Greengrass, Madam Bones, and Regent Longbottom are researching through ministerial and Wizengamot records." The why of it. Taking a breath, he said, "Now, as Sirius Black is currently Lord Apparent, and I'm his designated heir, that makes me heir presumptive for the noble and most ancient House of Black. So, I can also be formally addressed as Heir Black, and Dumbledore also appears to know that and has placed a proxy on that house seat as well, the bastard. And the reason that information is to be kept secret is because Draco Malfoy, the Ponzi git of whom you've just met, thinks he's Heir Black. He's wrong, but I don't want to put the idea in his father's head, through him to get me bumped off, thus ensuring Malfoy gets control of the Black Fortune. I think the only reason Sirius Black isn't currently dead is because Malfoy Sr. expects the conditions of Azkaban to kill off Black any day now, thereby saving him the effort and galleons to effect it." After a few more questions and answers were discussed, Harry suggested he and Neville lift down the girls' trunks so they could get changed into their school robes. After the girls agreed, he and Neville lifted down the trunks for Tracy and Susan, plus Harry's, as Daphne followed his earlier suggestion and put her travelling school robes in the top of his trunk. Hannah headed back to the compartment where she had left her own trunk with the promise she'd be right back with her robes to change into. And Hermione was already wearing hers. Harry and Neville then stepped out of the compartment and stood guard while the girls changed. Hannah came back carrying a bundle of clothes a short while later and ducked right in. A few minutes later, the compartment door was slid open and the boys re-entered, changing places with the girls. They quickly restored Tracy and Susan's trunks before getting down Neville's. The boys quickly changed, then opened the door for the girls to re-enter. Harry scooped up the book Noble Etiquette, before also scooping up the book An Introduction to the Wizarding World for Hermione. Relocking the trunk, he and Neville quickly restored both trunks in the overhead before letting the girls back in and resuming their seats. Harry then offered both books to Hermione and said, "Keep them for as long as you need them or until I ask for them, and don't on-loan them to anyone else." Hermione nodded and said, "Thank you, Harry," before she opened the first book to have a quick scan through it. When he sat down, Daphne cuddled into the side of him and whispered, "My big strong man, you." Harry just snorted in response. That morning, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore rose from his bed in his private quarters almost gleefully. Today was the day Harry Potter was arriving for his first day at Hogwarts. After almost 12 years of planning, Stage 2 of his greater good plan was about to commence. Stage 1, of course, was the boy being raised in safety by his mother's sister's family. It was almost 6 weeks ago his Deputy Headmistress Professor Minerva McGonagall entered his office with a smile. Grasped in her offhand was a piece of Muggle paper. She approached his desk and offered it to him. "He's coming, Albus," she said with a smile. Dumbledore accepted the slip of paper and turned it right way up. Written upon it with a Muggle pen was the simple statement, "I accept." Harry Potter, offering the slip back to the tall witch before him, he said, quite concise, but effective in its communication. "Thank you for showing it to me, Minerva." Taking back the slip of paper, McGonagall said, "I find myself quite looking forward to young Mr. Potter coming to Hogwarts. I wonder if he'll be anything like his father or his mother before him." I suspect we won't know the answer to that until well after he's settled into life here," replied Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I find myself mired in many hours of parchment work, through which to wade ere I can say I'm done for the day." Hesitating just a moment, McGonagall said, "Of course, Albus, I just find myself wanting to share this news with everyone." Then she turned about and walked back out the office. The little red-headed first-year Hufflepuff, Susan Bones, was as stunned as everyone else what Harry Potter said when he was standing next to the stool with the sorting hat upon it. She was still stunned when he stormed off the platform and stormed back up between the tables, and was just as stunned when he began to disrobe as he suddenly mounted the Hufflepuff table about 2/3 of the way down its length. However, when she saw the scars, the marks and the faded yellowing bruises on the boy's chest, back and arms, she was horrified. She knew what she had to do. She needed to get her aunt fast. She climbed back up from the table and ran out of the room as fast as she could. As she ran, she pulled the charm on her necklace chain out from under her robes. She grabbed hold of the charm and yanked on it. Her aunt had told her it was an emergency contact charm. If Susan was in trouble, she was to activate it. Her aunt would come running. Susan knew Aunt Amelia could not apparate onto the grounds of Hogwarts, so she ran as fast as she could towards where her aunt would appear. That spot was directly outside the main gates to the grounds. She did not notice the flash of magic behind her or see the windows of the great hall blow outwards in shattered glass. Susan ran as fast as she could, but being a crying young girl, wasn't as fast as her aunt, and a couple of Aurors could arrive outside the main gate and come running towards the castle. Susan ran into the arms of her aunt while the two Aurors stopped either side and scanned the surrounds looking for threats. Still sobbing, Susan bawled, "It's Harry, Aunt Amy. He's been horribly beaten." Trying to calm her niece, Madam Bones paused in shock before her training kicked in. The boy who lived, beaten, she thought. Sweet Merlin. "Where is he, Susan?" she implored. Backing away from her aunt, Susan sobbingly replied, "He's in the great hall." Looking at both her Aurors, Madam Bones snapped at them. "Go!" They got together. They ran the rest of the way to the castle, ran in through the main doors and into the great hall with wands drawn. They were met with what could only be described as chaos. The hall was poorly lit. Most of the floating candles had been knocked down. Most of the ones still lit were hovering over and behind the head table. They found a bare-chested young boy was lying sprawled out on his back on the Hufflepuff table. Blood covered his face. There were crying children everywhere, and shouting was going on up at the head table. Golden crockery and cutlery was strewn across the floor, mixed in with extinguished candles and table decorations. Little remained on most of the tables. Children were milling around, some sitting at benches, others standing. They were crying, sobbing, or just looking around in a daze. Both Aurors barked out. Aurors! The school healer, Poppy Pomfrey, was attempting to attend the boy on the table while clearing the area of other, clearly distressed children. She ignored the Aurors, however, so did everyone else. After a few moments, Pomfrey looked up at them and snapped out, "Go to the fireplace in the infirmary and call St. Mungo's. Tell them I've got many multiple trauma victims here and need any and all assistance they can send." When neither Aurora moved with the alacrity she expected, she barked at them, "Go." Again, they got a few moments later. One returned and said to her, "My partner will place that call. I'm a trained battle medic. What do you need?" Hesitating just a moment, she said, "Go to the head table. One of the professors was attacked by what appeared to be a malevolent spirit. He's the one in the lilac-colored robes and turban." The battle medic healer ran towards the head table just as his boss, Madam Bones, entered the hall with young Susan in tow. Just as she cleared the doors, she stopped, just as stunned as her two Aurors first were. Susan was first to recover. She ran into the chaos, looking for her friend Hannah Abbott. Feeling her niece run past her, Madam Bones snapped to and strode over to Pomfrey. "Poppy," she cried, "what in Merlin's name happened here?" Just glancing over her shoulder at the head of the DMLE, Pomfrey snapped, "I don't have time to answer your questions, Amelia. I'm trying to save this young man's life. Go see if you can get any sense out of Minerva or Phileas." That's when she noticed Harry lying on the table. Madam Bones just nodded with a grim look, drew her aura's badge from underneath her robes, and tapped it with the tip of her wand. Speaking into it, she barked, "I want all on-duty auras not otherwise engaged to hustle their bums to the Great Hall in Hogwarts now. We've got an emergency here, people." Tapping the badge again, she dropped it back into her robes and carefully made her way through the chaos to the head table. She wanted answers, and she wanted them now. Clearing the last of the students, she was confronted with Minerva McGonagall clearly berating Albus Dumbledore at the top of her lungs behind a privacy bubble. The woman was also clearly apoplectic with rage. Not wanting to spend her time trying to calm either verbal combatant, Aunt Amelia simply fired stunners at them both, knocking both out. Checking to ensure there would be no one about to hex her back, she spun on her heel, stuck her finger and thumb just inside her mouth, and let blast with a loud whistle. The students were startled enough to quieten down and look back at her. "Right," she called. "I'm Madam Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE. I'm taking charge here, so listen up." When she was sure she had their attention, she continued, "I want all students who are uninjured to take seat at either the Gryffindor or Slytherin tables, or standing along the wall on the other side of them. I do not care what your normal houses are, you will do this. I want this passage up the middle, indicating the space between the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables, cleared immediately. Those students who have been injured in any way, I want you sitting at either the Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff tables." Waiting a few moments to ensure everyone had heard, she again continued, "Well, move!" Once she saw the children were beginning to move, she turned back to the staff table. Glaring at the remaining conscious staff, she snapped out, "What the bloody hell are you lot doing just sitting there? You have clearly injured and distressed students to deal with. Professors Snape, Sprout and Flitwick check on the students for injuries. The rest of you assist them. Now." The staff, finally, began to move. "Potter just had to come in and make a big scene, didn't he?" snarled a tall, greasy-haired man wearing black robes. "Waltzed right in and—" "Shut up, right now, Professor Snape," barked Madam Bones. "If I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Now, go and do your job and look after the students." Rounding on her battle medic Aurora, she asked, "Well?" Approaching her, the battle medic Aurora cast his own privacy shield before telling her, "The man's dead. It looks like he was suffering a recent possession, but that possession has now ended. I've nothing else that explains it." Frowning at her aura, Madam Bones sighed and said, "Cast a notice me not field over the body, but don't move it. This is clearly now a crime scene. We'll begin our investigations once we sort out the children." As she turned back to look down the tables, she saw the children had almost finished sorting themselves out, with the exception of a few small groups of crying girls. That's when a group of meaty witches and wizards rapidly walked into the hall from the entry hall. She watched as the school's healer, Poppy Pomfrey, grabbed one of the senior healers that had just entered, and was gesticulating wildly over the prone form of the boy on the Hufflepuff table. The new healer motioned for a third to join them. The others began seeing to the few minor injuries of a few students who appeared to have minor cuts and abrasions. Bones called the diminutive Professor Felius Flitwick to join her from where he had been using his skill in charms to heal some of the minor injuries of the students. "All right, Felius," she began. "Now that the team of healers from St. Mungo's is here, what the bloody hell happened?" Flitwick began to describe how the sorting started out, as it always did each year. Then what happened when young Harry Potter's name was called, and he walked up to the stool. He told her how the boy looked quite angry and how some of the other first years appeared afraid of him, and how, when he reached the stool, his face developed a mien of fury. He told how the boy then looked up at the face of the deputy headmistress where she stood alongside the stool with the sorting hat in her hand, and said, "No." He described how the boy then berated the headmaster and the deputy headmistress before he started to storm out of the hall, unwilling to be sorted or even attend the school. He described how the boy then stopped and climbed onto the Hufflepuff table, stripping himself to the waist as he did, before screaming at and berating pretty much most of the school. Then he explained how the boy finally let out a blood-curdling scream towards the ceiling before his face seemed to burst open with blood. He described how an evil spirit seemed to have been ejected out of the boy's forehead as the boy appeared to expend a massive burst of accidental magic, which is how the mess around the hall occurred and some of the children were injured before he collapsed where he stood. Flitwick then described how the spirit ejected from the head of the young Mr. Potter seemed to hesitate for a few moments before it sped towards Professor Quirinius. It struck the professor in the head, where it seemed to rip out a kindred spirit. The professor then collapsed onto the table, apparently dead. The two spirits merged into a larger entity before it flew out one of the blown-out windows of the hall into the night. It was not too long afterwards that the auras burst into the hall. Madam Bones listened carefully to the testimony of the diminutive professor before she turned back to the demi-carnage amongst the house tables. She turned back to the professor before reaching into her robes and pulling out a stoppered field. She asked, "All right, Phileas, may I have a copy of the memory, please?" "Certainly," the professor replied. He stood there for a moment or two, clearly thinking hard before pressing the tip of his wand to his right temple. Carefully drawing the wand away, there was a silvery, misty strand pulled with it from his temple. As he drew his wand away, Madam Bones opened the file and held it out. The professor carefully allowed the strand to drop into the file before allowing it to release and pulling his wand away. Madam Bones restoppered the file and replaced it within her robes. "Thank you, Professor," she said. "I'm sure that's going to greatly help. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to see if I can get an update on the health of young Mr. Potter." "Certainly," he replied. "But do you mind if I revive Albus and Minerva?" Hesitating for only a moment, she said, "Wake them. However, I don't want to see them getting into another argument either, and tell them both I want to have words with them after I talk to the healers." "Certainly," the professor again replied. With the students now sitting back down and the center passageway cleared, Madam Bones was able to walk back down to where Madame Pomfrey and the other healer were still working on who she now knew to be Harry Potter. Calmly stepping up to them, she asked, "How is he?" Without looking around, Pomfrey replied, "His magic is still unstable, but we're getting a handle on it. We think it was an unreleased infant lock that shattered." Madam Bones hissed in shock. The second healer took it up from there. As for his forehead, it appears there was a soul fragment buried behind it. On hearing that, Madam Bones hissed in shock. "Again, it's gone?" she asked. The healer replied, "We think the release of the lock on his magic forcefully expelled it. There was residual dark energy emanating from it, but I think I've now cleared it away. As you can see, his scar is now practically gone. We've placed him in an induced somnolent state while we get his magic stabilized. After that, we'll get him to St. Mungo's to work on the rest of his injuries." "There's more?" asked Madam Bones, shocked. The two healers glanced up at each other for a few moments before Pomfrey replied, "A great deal more, I'm afraid. Too much to list here, and not for younger ears to hear." Madam Bones knew she was referring to the children nearby. "Right," said Pomfrey suddenly. Calling out, she barked, "We need a stretcher over here ready to transport the patient directly to St. Mungo's." One of the other nearby healers was just packing up from applying essence of dittany to the cut on the forehead of a young witch. He looked up and said, "I've one in my bag. Just a moment." Vanishing the remains of the swabs he was using on the young witch, he reached into his bag, drew forth a shrunken wizarding stretcher, and unshrunk it. The stretcher hovered about 4 feet above the floor. Pomfrey and the other healer working on Harry then backed away before she levitated the boy off the table and onto the stretcher. He was quickly strapped to it. Knowing they were about to whiz the boy away, Madam Bones turned to another Aurora and commanded, "I want statements from at least a half-dozen of those students calm enough to give 1+1 from each of the staff that were here when what happened, happened. I've also secured a memory from Professor Flitwick, but I also want one from a student from the opposite end of the hall who's over the age of consent. This happened in the middle of the sorting, so I want the children taken to their common rooms as soon as possible. They need to eat, and this hall is still a crime scene." "What about the unsorted first years?" one of the auras asked. Thinking for a moment, Madam Bones replied, "Ask Professor Flitwick and Sprout to spread them out amongst the houses for tonight. They can be properly sorted later. I'll be at St. Mungo's, and tell Professor Flitwick that too. If Mr. Potter wakes up, I want to be there when he does." "Yes, ma'am," the Auror responded. Madam Bones then chased after the stretcher bearing Harry. It was already out the door and on the way up the stairs to the second floor and the infirmary. As soon as Madame Pomfrey and the other healer had Harry stabilized enough to move, he was flued through the fireplace in the Hogwarts infirmary directly to casualty at St. Mungo's. Madame Bones, joined by one of her auras, stepped through immediately after. With young Harry still unconscious, she and her Aurora followed the floating gurney directly into the treatment room. When one of the meaty witches saw her, she turned to the monocle-wearing head of the DMLE and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you cannot be in here." Glaring back, Madame Bones said, "Too bad. I'm not letting that boy out of my sight until I have answers as to what happened in the Hogwarts Great Hall tonight." Madame Pomfrey was relaying medical information and conditions about her young patient to the others who had now joined them in the treatment room and ignored the presence of the two senior Auroras now in the room. When she wrapped up her snappish report to the other healers, she backed away to let them get to work. Madame Bones saw that the meaty witch was done and caught her attention. "Madame Pomfrey," she called. "A word, if I may?" The meaty witch looked back and gave her head a short nod. "Outside, please," and gestured to the hallway outside the door. Madame Bones turned to her Auror and said, "Stay with the boy," before following the meaty witch outside. In the hallway, she asked, "Okay, Poppy, in the words of an experienced healer, what the hell happened tonight?" The meaty witch sighed and said, "The sorting was going as per usual." "Skip that," interrupted Madame Bones. "Just pick it up from when Mr. Potter stepped up onto the Hufflepuff table." Nodding, the meaty witch replied, "He was angry. No, he was livid. I've never seen a young man of his age in a rage like that before, and I've seen a lot. Amongst other things, he was ranting about how Dumbledore and Minerva apparently ruined his life by abandoning him on a doorstep immediately after that fateful night. That's when he stepped up onto the table and ripped off his robes, baring his torso to the entire school. We were all completely shocked with what we were witnessing, what we saw. He was also flaring his magic, though I don't think he was aware of it. He was practically glowing. Suddenly, he looked like he was struggling to breathe. He threw his head back and screamed. That's when he emitted an almighty pulse of magic. It was a visible wave of magical energy that knocked people and items over within close proximity to him. It also caused, for example, the failure of the enchantments that keep the candles floating above the tables, and it blew out the windows in the hall. He collapsed onto the table on his back, and amongst the screams of the students, there was a much more feral scream that came from him. It appeared that whatever happened caused a partial possession to be forced out of his head. By that time, the boy appeared to be unconscious. Thank goodness. The partial possession, or whatever it was, coalesced in the air above his head. It hesitated for a moment before it appeared to be dragged through the air straight at Professor Quirrell. Professor Quirrell, by this time, was also screaming and clutching his head. The spirit slammed into Professor Quirrell's head and appeared to knock another partial possession out of the professor. The professor slumped forward onto the table while the two spirits merged into one above his body. Hesitating for a moment, the meaty witch appeared horrified when she said the spirit had a face. "Amelia, it was he who must not be named." "Oh, sweet Merlin," gasped the head of the DMLE. Madame Bones had left the hospital late the previous night after ensuring Harry was out of the woods regarding his health. He was moved with an Auror guard to a critical injury and close monitoring private room after the healers in casualty were assured his health was stabilized. Before she departed, though, the lead healer gave her a couple of sheets of parchment with a list of the injuries their scans had detected during their examination of their most famous of young patients. His face bore quite the thunderous expression as he handed over the sheets. The parchment also confirmed that the boy had indeed been suffering from a partial possession that was now, thankfully, gone. The healer said, "We'll be keeping him here for a while in one of our private treatment rooms. We're going to be practically force-feeding him a pretty substantial potion regime for the next week, at least." "Thank you," replied Amelia. "I'll also be placing a 24-hour guard on him for while he's here. You just make sure that whoever did all this," the healer growled while indicating the parchment, "is brought up on charges." I'll also stand as witness for the criminal's trial." "Noted," sighed Madam Bones. "You take care of him, and I'll take care of the culprit." It was now the morning after the events of the sorting feast, and Madam Bones had only stopped for a few short hours in her investigations. She'd only managed to get about 3 hours' sleep on the hideaway cot in her office in all that time. She had reviewed the memories collected by herself and her auras from staff and students at the school, and they tallied with what she'd heard from Madame Pomfrey and Professor Flitwick. Now she was going through ministry records searching for information on just where and with whom the boy had been living. Harry hadn't been too clear with addresses and the like when she'd last talked to him. She was also trying to discover just why the boy was specifically accusing Albus Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, and Rubeus Hagrid with crimes against him. From the ministry records she'd learned that just about all of them had been sealed by Albus Dumbledore himself, and that Albus Dumbledore had appointed himself as the boy's magical guardian. What did not make sense was that a magical guardian was only required when the minor was a Muggle-born, which Harry most certainly was not. She was going to have to talk to Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid, as it appeared the boy knew they had something to do with his disappearance and subsequent abuse. Knowing the old man's penchant for disregarding the law when it ill-suited his purposes, she knew she faced an uphill battle to get any information out him. No, first she'd need to increase the guard on the boy while he was in the hospital. Then she'd go speak to McGonagall and Hagrid before confronting Dumbledore. If necessary, she'd make sure she had all her facts before taking Dumbledore to court and forcing him to disclose what had happened to the boy. After all, he'd claimed magical guardianship of him, and that made him complicit in the boy being abused. Rising from behind her desk, she walked to her door, flung it open, and called out, "Scrimgeour, Shacklebolt, in here," before walking back to sit at her desk. When the two senior Aurors entered, she gave them instructions to prepare a rotating roster of minimum 2-person teams to stand guard 24/7 on the boy, until further notice. "And," she growled, "if Albus bloody Dumbledore or any other member of Hogwarts staff, excluding Poppy Pomfrey, attempts to get anywhere near him, I want them flat out refused entry. If they persist, immediately arrest them and call me, and they had better be in bloody magic suppression cuffs when I get there. Am I clear?" "Yes, ma'am," they both replied. "Good," she said emphatically. "Now, scram." They scrammed. Once they'd left her office, she summoned the heads of the Department of Magical Children's Services, the Improper Use of Magic Office, and the Obliviation Squad. She wanted to know where the records for one Harry James Potter were being stored, and the second and third offices would have the records regarding any accidental magic the boy had cast before he entered Hogwarts. As she was investigating a sudden death, namely one Quirinus Quirrell, she had the authority to open the sealed files regarding Harry Potter, who appeared to be at least somewhat responsible for the man's death. On returning to the private ward at St. Mungo's, where Harry was currently undergoing treatment, Madam Bones was waylaid from entering by a rather harried-looking senior Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to assign a couple more auras here," he begged. "And why is that, Kingsley?" she asked. "I've already had to turn away Albus Dumbledore twice from demanding entry. Plus, Lord Greengrass was also here a few minutes ago demanding entry. Madam Longbottom came by a little earlier than that, as well as a few journalists and photographers," he replied. "Dumbledore, I understand," mused Madam Bones. "And yes, my ruling on him being banned from entering the room stands, just as it does with the rest of the Hogwarts staff, excluding Madam Pomfrey. However, you are unaware that Mr. Potter is betrothed to Lord Greengrass's oldest, Daphne. As such, you may grant him access. And House Potter and Longbottom are allied houses, so Madam Longbottom is also to be allowed access. I'll add a second Auror as backup for you out here. As per standards, inform whomever it is that joins you here that no one is to speak to the press about this. Am I clear?" Giving a respectful nod, Shacklebolt said, "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." With a nod of her own, Madam Bones entered the room. Harry Potter was still unconscious, but a healer was also in attendance using a charm to make the boy drink a potion. "How is he?" asked Madam Bones. "Healing," replied the healer. We've put him into a dreamless sleep while we give him potions to repair the damage his body's been subjected to. Otherwise, he might have suffered a bit from the pain. And for how long do you expect to keep him asleep? She asked. Hopefully we'll have him awake before dinner tonight, replied the healer. By then the pain from the healing potions should prove no more than an annoyance. And his magic will take care of any lingering symptoms. Giving a grunt of acknowledgement, Madam Bones said, as per my last, I'm to be contacted the minute he's awake. I'll be in my office at the ministry. The healer gave a nod in reply and said, Yes, Madam Bones, and continued with her work as the lady in question walked back out the door. Come on, Harry, she thought. I need to talk to you. On the morning after the incident, as it was being spoken of, the last class had just finished for the day when Potions Master, Professor Severus Snape, saw a man he recognized as the father of one of his newest snakes walk in the door of his classroom. Lord Greengrass, drawled Snape, to what do I owe the honor? I've come to collect my eldest daughter, Potions Master, Daphne. I believe she's one of yours, said Cygnus. Indeed, replied Snape. I take it this is a family matter? Indeed, replied Cygnus, not clarifying the point. And when may we find her returning? Probably this evening, possibly tomorrow morning before class. Snape merely nodded and said, I would hazard a guess she'll be in the Slytherin common room about now. I take it you remember your way? With a nod of his own, Cygnus replied, Of course. With almost a dismissive gesture, Snape said, The password is cunning and guile. I'll inform the other staff at dinner. Miss Greengrass will be away on family matters until tomorrow morning at the latest. Thank you, Potions Master, for your consideration, said Cygnus with barely a head nod of recognition before he turned on his heel and left the classroom, heading for the Slytherin common room. Daphne was almost frantic with worry about what happened to her Harry the evening before at the sorting. She wanted to rush over and help him when he collapsed, but Tracy held her back. By the time she was able to dislodge herself from her friend's grip, the older years were already herding all the children away from the Hufflepuff table. She watched, almost in horror, as Madame Pomfrey, the school healer, worked rapidly on the inert form of her betrothed. She could feel her ring give off the occasional vibration and pulse of light, but she knew they weren't malicious attacks. When Madame Pomfrey and one of the healers from St. Mungo's levitated Harry's body off the table onto a waiting stretcher and then hurry him out of the room, she wanted nothing more than to rush after them. However, she knew the auras that had arrived would have blocked her from doing so. Instead, she stayed with the other first-year Slytherins and allowed herself to be comforted by her friend. As soon as she was able to, though, she raced to the owlery to write and send a note to her father. She found Hedwig there, looking quite distressed. When Daphne stepped into the roost, Hedwig immediately flew down to land on her shoulder. She softly hooted in the girl's ear. While she was writing a note to her father, she talked to the bird. I know you understand, girl. Something bad happened to Harry during the sorting. He's been rushed off to St. Mungo's. I need to get a message to my dad right away about what happened. I know I can give it to one of the other owls to carry, but I only trust you to carry something so important for me and Harry. Hedwig gave a bit of a scoffing huff and nibbled gently on Daphne's ear as the girl wrote her note. As soon as Daphne finished writing the letter, Hedwig flew to a lower-level roost within arm's reach of the girl, and Daphne quickly attached the note to the owl's leg. Once both owl and girl were happy, the note was firmly affixed. Hedwig took immediate flight out one of the many windows. Daphne sighed as she watched the snowy, softly glowing outline of the owl disappear into the night. Be safe, girl, she whispered, and hurry. As soon as classes finished for the day, she rushed back to the Slytherin dorms. She had no sooner unloaded her books onto her bed when one of the girls in an older year poked her head in and said, Your father awaits you in the common room, Miss Greengrass. Daphne practically flew out of the room, and half an hour later she was walking beside her father through the corridors of St. Mungo's, heading for what she hoped was the healthy form of her man. After being brought up short by a pair of eras standing outside the door of a private ward to identify themselves, both Daphne and her father were allowed through, but they'd had to get past quite a few people she recognized as probably being journalists to get there. A couple had tried to question them before they stepped through, but she ignored them all. Inside, they were greeted by the sight of Harry appearing still unconscious, on a standard ward hospital bed. Daphne was introduced by her father to both Madam Bones and Madam Longbottom, who had been standing off to the side, quietly conversing before they walked in. As soon as the introductions were done with, though, Daphne quickly moved to the side of the bed. She took Harry's hand in one of her own and placed her other one on his shoulder. "Oh, Harry," she cried to the sleeping form on the bed. "What have you done to yourself?" She felt the hand she was holding twitch a little before her grasp of it was returned. Harry's eyes fluttered a little before she heard him ask in a soft voice, Daphne. Moving her other hand to brush her fingers through his hair, she felt her heart give a leap of joy. "Yes, Harry," she cried. "I'm here." She didn't notice the adults, having heard Harry respond, move closer round the bed. Nor did she notice Madam Bones move away again and stick her head outside the door for a moment before returning. "What did you do to yourself?" the girl cried. "You gave me such a fright." "I'm sorry," he croaked out. "I lost my temper. I let it get away from me. I couldn't stop it." "Harry, it's Aunt Amelia," piped in Madam Bones. "You're in St. Mungo's and you're quite safe. Just rest for a bit. I've called for one of your healers to come and check up on you." All right," whispered Harry. Madam Bones moved away and indicated for the other two adults to join her. "What in Merlin's name happened last night, Amelia?" Cygnus pretty much growled. "I know you've already investigated it by now. If you come by my office later, I'll let you watch the pensive memories I have of the event," she replied. "For now, though, the crib notes. The first years, including your daughter and Harry, came into the Great Hall. As per normal, the sorting began, and students started to be sorted." The expression on Harry's face quickly turned to one of complete anger. It seems to have come when he first spied the head table. When Harry's name was called out, he came forward to be sorted. However, as soon as he reached the stool, he stopped, looked at Professor McGonagall with a look of fury and said, "No." Then he's turned around and headed back out of the hall, stormed out, really. Before he's made it all the way past the tables, he's jumped up onto the Hufflepuff table, stripping himself to the waist as he did so, and proceeded to rant at the professors, especially Dumbledore. He displayed all these scars and marks on his torso and how they were caused by Dumbledore dumping him on a Muggle doorstep somewhere. During that rant, he began to flare his magic. He suddenly screams at the ceiling. There's an almighty pulse of flared magic, which causes objects and students to be banished from around him, and he collapses. At that point, one of the professors, Professor Quirrell, is clutching at his own head and screaming. Hesitating for a moment, she continues, a little horrified by what she says. That's when what appears to be a partial possession is expelled from behind that scar on his forehead. By then, Harry's unconscious on the table, and there's pandemonium amongst the students. That partial possession spirit hovers over him for a few moments before it flies at Professor Quirrell. It slams into the professor's head before yet another partial possession is ejected from Quirrell. The two spirits merge into one and flee out one of the hall's windows. Harry, meanwhile, remains lying unconscious on the table with blood and muck covering his face from the now open wound that was his scar. Madame Pomfrey headed straight to him, ignoring everyone else, and frantically began treatment. From what I've gathered so far, Harry had a very tight infant magical lock on his magic. It shattered, allowing his magic to fly free. That caused it to pulse in a huge flare, which in turn caused the possession to be expelled from his body. His magic almost detonated, but the flaring caused his magical reserves to drain to almost critically low levels before it did. Madame Pomfrey and the emergency healers brought him here as soon as they deemed him stable to travel. Since he's been here, they've managed to draw up a list of the damage to his body. The poor boy was suffering from long-term malnutrition, had multiple poorly set bones from breaks, plus a host of other problems. They've already replaced the worst set bones and have him on a strong potion regime to combat the effects of the malnutrition. Some of the scars on his body are too bad to deal with without excising the lesions completely, and replacing them with new skin growth. The others they can treat with a salve, and the scars should fade with time. I have no idea how his treatment at the hands of his relatives has remained undiscovered this long, but one thing I know for sure, Albus Dumbledore has just lost any claim to being his magical guardian." "He's not," said Cygnus, interrupting. "Sorry?" asked Amelia. "Albus Dumbledore is not legally Harry's magical guardian," replied Cygnus. "Dumbledore claims he is," said Amelia. "I know what he claims, Amelia," said Cygnus more firmly, "but he's not. According to the Potter's will, Augusta should be his guardian, as Frank and Alice should have been caring for him at the time they were attacked. And, if not Augusta, then Sirius Black, then me, and then you. Harry received a letter from his father through Gringotts when he first went into the bank just before his 11th birthday. The letter informed him of who his guardians were supposed to be, and also instructed him to take up the headship of House Potter on his 11th birthday. That he did. The first thing he also did was unseal the will, which had been sealed on Dumbledore's orders, and have it read. In the will it also stipulates who his guardians are supposed to be. Harry has the original letter and a copy of the will in his Hogwarts trunk. With an expression of cold fury, he continued, "Albus Dumbledore had no right to claim guardianship of the boy. However, since he has, I want the old bastard charged with child neglect, neglect of his duties as a magical guardian, child abandonment, and conspiracy to commit child abuse. Add whatever else you want to throw at him, and I don't want to hear any of this for the greater good nonsense. I also want him immediately stripped of any claim to be his guardian, magical or otherwise, until such time as my complaint is fully investigated and dealt with. Furthermore, I want his relatives, Vernon and Petunia Dursley, investigated and charged with child neglect, child abuse, assault on a minor, and assault upon the heir of an ancient house." With a look of righteous anger on her own face, Madam Bones coldly replied, "Consider it done." By late afternoon, Harry was starting to come around. A healer had already come in and was checking him over with her wand. Harry was staring back into the reddened eyes of his betrothed while the healer was working, with a feeling of peace and love. "Wait a minute," he thought. "Where are my glasses?" With a slight frown of confusion, he reached up with his free hand to check his face. He couldn't feel his glasses. Holding his hand in front of his eyes and looking at his fingers, he could see them clearly and in sharp detail. Seeing the look of confusion on his face, Daphne asked, "What's wrong?" "I can see," he softly replied. "Of course you can see," said Daphne, now also confused. "Why wouldn't you be able to?" "No," replied Harry. "I mean, I can see without my glasses. My vision's fine." "That would be because the pressure has been taken off your optic nerves, Mr. Potter," said the healer. "With the pressure removed, your magic's been able to heal and correct your eyesight." "So no more glasses?" asked Harry. "No more glasses," replied the healer with a smile. "Oh, thanks," said Harry. "I think I'll look a bit funny without glasses, though." "I think I prefer you without them, actually," said a smiling Daphne. "I can see your eyes better this way." Feeling around his face some more, Harry also noticed he couldn't find the ridging of scar. "My scar's gone too?" he asked. The healer nodded and said, "Once we cleaned everything up there and cleaned out all the gunk, we were able to excise the dead tissue, seal the wound, and vanish the scar." "No more scar?" "Oh, thank you," said Harry. "I never liked that thing. It was too much of a reminder of, you know." "No more scar means no one's going to be staring at it anymore, Harry," said Daphne. "Besides, it was a blemish on your good looks. You're actually quite handsome, you know." "Well, I would have to be to have any chance of not being thought of as your ugly betrothed now, wouldn't I?" he asked. Daphne blushed and gave him a light smack on his shoulder. "Pat!" she exclaimed. Thinking some more about how he felt, Harry said, "I don't feel much pain anywhere, actually. Just a little uncomfortable inside. Even my headache's gone. I actually feel pretty good, more alive." "Healing potion," said the healer. "Most of the injuries you were suffering from, old and new, we've repaired. The uncomfortable feeling you're experiencing is the healing potion still working inside your body, healing the longer-term damage. The feeling will pass when the potions have done their work. We've also given you nutrient potions, but what we really need you to do now is eat," she said. "Eat a lot. I'll organize a large tray of delicious hot food for you as soon as I'm done here, which I now am." With a smile and a final pat of his shoulder, the healer left. Harry turned to Daphne and asked, "What happened after Hesitating a bit, Daphne replied, "When you collapsed, there was this dark spirit that came out of your scar. It attacked the professor wearing purple robes. Then it flew out the window. I found out from one of the older girls he was Professor Quirrell. You had this big burst of magic that sent crockery, cutlery, table decorations and some students flying. But no one was really hurt. A couple of bumps and knocks, that's all." "Oh God, I'm sorry," he groaned. "Not your fault," she firmly said. "The school healer worked on you for a bit, and Madam Bones came in with some auras. They moved all the students out of the way. Then some more healers came in. A couple helped Madam Pomfrey work on you while the others went about those students who had cuts and abrasions and healed them. Just as the healers were finishing up Professor Flitwick, he's the little half-goblin professor, called in the house elves to clear away the mess and replace the crockery and cutlery. Professor Quirrell was levitated out the teacher's entrance a little while later. We found out this morning that he was dead because of a possession by the spirit of he who must not be named. Professor Flitwick then finished the sorting for the last half-dozen students. Weasley went into Gryffindor, and we were sent to our common rooms, where the feast was served. That now makes you the only student not yet sorted. I was sorted into Slytherin, by the way, as was Tracy. If you don't remember, Neville's in Gryffindor, as is Hermione, and Susan and Hannah are in Hufflepuff. Dumbledore left for a while as soon as the auras left, but came back about half an hour later, clearly upset. Professor McGonagall was upset with him for the whole time he was there. About you, I think. If looks could kill, she'd have killed him a dozen times over. All anyone could talk about all during the feast and right through to past breakfast this morning was you and what you did. Malfoy mouthed off in the common room after the feast, and Zabini punched him in the face for it. I tried to talk to Susan about what happened this morning, but she didn't know anything. However, she's just as worried about you. I could see that Neville was the same. At lunch today, Neville came up to me and said how Weasley was going on in their dorm last night about how you were evil because you were supposedly possessed by you-know-who. Neville punched him and called him an ignorant idiot. With a shrug and a wry grin, she said, "The general consensus is that he who must not be named spirit tried to take you over and you used your powerful magic to defeat it, thus proving you're everything from the reincarnation of Merlin to the reincarnation of Grindelwald. The boy who lived has just defeated you-know-who for the second time." Harry just closed his eyes and groaned in response. "Why me?" he plaintively asked. "No one in particular, as if I don't already have enough on my plate." Daphne smiled, leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. "I may not be a seer," she said, "but I can already tell life is going to be very interesting around you, Mr. Potter." The three adults by then had finished their private discussion and came over. "All right, Harry," said Aunt Amelia, "I need you to tell me in your own words what happened last night. Specifically, I need to know why you got so angry." Harry sighed and said, "I guess it all started back on the train platform at King's Cross Station.